everyone from Asia, from
Uh,
Daegu and Okinawa, respectively. I'm Rachel Lorenz, the creative Contessa, and this is Philip from Irish Medieval History. And we are very excited today to discuss all things about medieval fashion that we can dredge out of our brains to answer your questions, whatever they may be. So that means this is a question and answer format. So if you have questions, please do pop them in the live chat. And I'm staring straight at it, so I won't be able to miss anything. So Philip, thank you so much for joining me this morning. For some of my viewers, many of my viewers, this is their first time encountering you. So could you tell
Hi.
us a little bit about yourself, maybe?
Hello, my name is Philip Hayes, and I am in Irish medieval history on YouTube. My channel pretty much is a massive umbrella of everything Irish medieval. I started my channel about 4 years ago until I got pulled down and put back up again for covering controversial
YouTube.
topics like the Battle of Bloody Bay and stuff like that. So my channel is back up again and it's going up to 16.9K right now. So it's flying up through pretty good shorts and stuff. And pretty much anything to do with Irish medieval history, I either cover from my experience and stuff, or I get specialists in to try to cover more broader topics and specialized topics on top of that. So if you're into anything to do with Irish medieval history, definitely check us out. That's Irish medieval history. Um, Anything else?
Yeah, so I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and every other person out there, that Philip's channel is very interesting. He's a very dynamic format. So I think if you enjoy my style, you'll definitely enjoy his style. So today we're talking about fashion, and we were originally going to focus on the 15th century, but honestly, our areas of expertise are broader than that.
Mm.
So we are happy to discuss basically everything from the first millennium up through the 16th century for my part anyway.
Mm.
So I also brought to help feed the fire of today's discussion, I brought some show and tell items. So you can't see what I'm touching here, but on one hand, I have medieval men's clothing from the 15th century for men. And on my other hand, I've got women from Italy and Burgundy. So we can actually do some show and tell through the layers as
Mm.
necessary. Uh,
Nice.
so let's see, we already have our first question. How is the the not a hennin coming? Maybe, Susan, do you mean the not a hennin, my new not a hennin? I'm not certain what a knot corn is. Uh, Her autocorrect can do interesting things to her comments. And for Irish medieval history, how common were turn shoes in medieval Ireland? That is a
Very common.
fantastic and interesting question.
Um, we have turncoats. It's actually my wife's specialty there. But yeah, we have turncoats going as far back as the Bronze Age, and they're actually quite simple to even start with. Where my wife can describe it far better than me. When I describe it, I butcher it. She has to correct me. But regardless, they're quite simple. They pretty much just wrap around the shoe, and then the excess leather can go between the holes to tighten it up nicely. So they start off very, very simple Bronze Age shoes that can go all the way up to was it the 1960s? So you still have fishermen wearing very, very simple bronze leather shoes all the way up to 1960s. We also have more elegant, more designed shoes as well, found in Irish forts throughout the entirety from the early medieval period all the way up to the late medieval period. We can find basically Irish Tuat forts and Crangenogs that have a rake of finds of turncoat of turn shoes, all with very very decorative designs. A lot of people do assume that Irish people don't wear shoes because there's a lot of drawings, and also we have photos all the way up to the 1960s where people aren't wearing shoes. But the reason why people don't wear shoes in Ireland until about well, depicted not wearing shoes in Ireland until about the 1960s is because anytime they go out into the countryside, they're either getting covered in mud or it's very slippery. Rubber soles don't become common until about the 1920s, and they don't really, like, not everyone has them until about the 1960s or so. So until then, you'd have loads of depictions of people um, going barefoot. And we also have children in around the 1950s who go to a school out in the countryside, and they're asked why they do not wear their shoes when they go outside to play, and they simply just turn around and say that they wear their shoes inside of the school, and then the moment they leave to go outside and play during lunchtime, they take their shoes off to not make their shoes muddy. They want to keep their shoes nice, clean, and shiny for inside the
Right.
classroom, which needs to be taken note of. And it's the same thing throughout the entirety of the late medieval period, where people are buying very elaborate, very decorative shoes. Um, like if you, for example, trade with someone from Florence and you go back to Kerry, you're not going to you're not going to wear your clean, good shoes outside when you're running around in the muck of Kerry. Like you're going to take them off the moment you leave the walls of Kerry, so you can, when you come back into another
Oh,
settlement,
interesting.
you look good, clean, and civilized.
Right.
So most likely you took off your shoes, whatever garment you had around your legs, you pulled it up and you went walking around the countryside until you got to another settlement. And then you pretty much, before you went around the corner to talk to the guardsman, in my assumption, it's an assumption of mine, is that you put back everything back on again, the shoes, the pants, and everything. And then you talk to the guardsman and he'd let you in and stuff. So you'd look civilized and presentable for when you're inside the settlement, in my interpretation.
Right. So that's very interesting because in Asia, Asian practice, it's the exact opposite historically.
Oh,
You wear your shoes outside and you
mm,
take them off when you go inside.
oh yeah.
Um, but that also that's predisposed in Asia. They've had floor heating for thousands of years, and we lost floor heating when, the after the Justinian plague, and no one could remember how to operate the hypocausts.
Yeah.
So it
Doesn't do it,
makes
all right.
it makes sense that you'd want your shoes on inside because the floors are cold.
Mm, mm,
But
mm, mm,
then, I mean, that begs the question for me. It's also cold outside a lot of the
mm.
year, and mud isn't exactly warm. So how are people not getting frostbite or I guess when it snowed, the ground was hard, so shoes were worn. So maybe it's a
Mm.
seasonal not wearing of shoes because human skin can only tolerate such low
Mm.
temperatures.
Yeah, it's very, very questionable, especially in Ireland and stuff. I think the person to definitely ask is the rambling Kern. He did entire projects and stuff of running around barefoot. Perhaps it's just something they just don't do during the winter. Maybe it's just
Right,
the summer months where they run around barefoot and stuff, and that they cover themselves up. Because we have leg wraps, obviously, in Ireland and various other ways to keep the legs warm, and we have socks as well in Ireland. So during the winter months, there are ways to keep yourself nice and warm and toasty and
right.
stuff. So perhaps it is just a thing of them taking off their shoes and socks and running around during the summer months, and that during the winter they're more kind of inside the house, inside their nice little crannogs, roundhouses, keeping themselves nice and toasty and warm. And obviously the Lord up in his tower and stuff.
Hmm.
It's also very interesting as well that the next to every tower house is crannogs, where you have people who are nice, toasty, and warm inside of them. And as you were saying before, that there is ways that to keep themselves nice and warm inside tower houses as well. With the what do you call them again? The nice little rugs and stuff for the walls.
Oh yeah, the tapestries.
That's
Like
the one,
like
the
right
tapestries and
right
stuff.
behind me.
Yes, brain wasn't clicking there. But yeah, as we were saying before, tapestries and stuff could be used, and rugs on the floor could be used to keep the castle nice and toasty during the winter and stuff. So there is ways and means. The Irish as well, we also have endless amount of cloaks and what they call brat references as well.
Mm,
Um, Brat being a big, massive, it's a mantle of a cloak, it's a huge cloak that the
right.
Irish would put on. It takes from my understanding, from what people have told me, I haven't taken on the challenge yet, and I'd love to build a mantle in the future. But people tell me it's quite easy to put together, but it's very time consuming. It takes a lot of time to put together the big, massive mantle to keep yourself nice and toasty. And for a lot of the Irish, it's a massive status as well, to show off your big, massive cloak,
Right.
to keep yourself nice and warm, and the very decorative designs and stuff that they would have had. What they would have looked like is beyond my knowledge, because it's quite strange. Because even during Richard II's reign, when Richard II comes to Ireland, he talks about the mantles and stuff, but doesn't give a proper description of what they look like. And we also don't have any photos of what they look like. From a military perspective, Richard II is absolutely fantastic because he has all the depictions of the armors and the arms, and even talks about the tactics and warfare. But when it comes down to everyday clothing, it's got nothing, you know?
Yeah, the annoying thing about chroniclers is they always focus on what interests them, not what
Mm,
interests us.
yeah.
So you can always tell a lot about the personality of the chronicler based on what it is they chose to relate to us.
Mm,
Yeah, it's the same problem with medieval dance, actually. Most
mm,
chroniclers, when they talk about dance in the Middle Ages or even the Renaissance, they talk about what the people are wearing while they're dancing. They don't talk about what they're
mm.
doing with their feet
Yeah, yeah.
because the dance itself doesn't matter. It's the wealth that you're wearing on your body. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting that Richard II didn't care enough about the civilian garments to describe
Mm,
them in any kind of detail.
yeah.
But then again, that probably makes sense from the perspective of a king. He has the most splendid things. Why should
Yeah.
he care about, what is going to impress him about what
Mm.
some, as you call them, bog trotters are
Yeah, bike riders, yeah.
wearing?
Um,
So
yeah,
the turn shoes, I mean the shoes that are in, are they proper turn shoes, meaning that they're sewn inside out and then turned right side out so that the seam is on the inside and they're kind of more like slippers, really leather slippers, or are the soles sewn on? Is there like an exterior sole? And do they
yeah,
look like the
they're
ones that we
turn
have in
shoes, all
Europe,
right,
basically?
because that's how they're described in the Jorvik Museum. So
Ah, right.
in the very early on, we don't have too many finds. We have finds here and there. My wife could go into far more detail than I can when it comes down to turn shows and stuff that we can find in Cranogs. But later on in the museum in York, what happens, you see,
Mm,
during the early medieval period is we have the Viking Age, and the Vikings come in and they
right.
build up Dublin, and then they marry the local population, and eventually we have a Irish Viking dynasty. They then in
Right.
turn invade the north of England, and they're very successful. They take over the north of England and they make the Jorvik, which is modern day York, their
Right.
main base in the north of England. And from there, we actually have tons of finds, and one of which is the turn shoes. So you can actually find loads of Irish Viking turn shoes in Jorvik, basically just referred to as the Jorvik shoes, I'm sure, or
Yeah,
Jorvik
a lot of
Viking shoes.
almost all of the garments from there are called the Jorvik something, the Jorvik hood, the
Yeah.
Jorvik tunic.
Mm,
Yeah, so for those who don't know, in modern day York, there is the Jorvik Viking Center, and it is
mm,
absolutely worth a visit. You must go there. It's
yeah,
like a living history kind of community, and there's a
yeah.
museum with all the extant, not all, but some of the extant items on display. Really worth checking out if you're interested in first millennium, sort of Northern Europe, Irish, Norse clothing. Yeah.
Mm,
So let's see. Just discovered you today, and I've already subscribed. Well, thank you, Kim McCauley. That's really awesome. And then
mm.
we have Ryan O'Malley. Uh, Jimmy from the Welsh Viking made reproduction turn shoes from genuine
He
Irish
did.
examples. Oh, very
Yeah.
cool. Very,
I
very
did
cool.
I did a reaction video to that one as well, which goes into more detail of that, because his video there on the turn shows the level of detail in that video is absolutely magnificent. So I then got his video, added it into another video I did. So you still have to go and watch Jimmy's video, then watch my video on how
Right.
to dress during the early medieval period during the Viking Age. A lot of people were very disappointed in that video because the Irish weren't dressing very Celtic. A lot of people assumed in
Why
the
would
early medieval
they?
period, a lot of people assumed in the early medieval period, at the very start, they were dressing as they would have done in Braveheart. And so
Oh,
my
right.
video kind of broke a lot of hearts. So I'm very sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sadly, during the very start of the early medieval period, people were dressing. In Ireland, it's very difficult to know how exactly they were dressing, but we have a fair idea they would have dressed sort of insular Roman. The
Right.
reason for that is because we're actually in the 5th century now, at the very start of the early medieval period with the fall of the Roman Empire. And by that point, Ireland is actually very well connected with
Right.
Rome. We know that first and foremost because of the Ugham writing, which is people now have pretty much come to the conclusion that it was made by an Irish, very educated Irish man, most likely some form of an Irish monk that was
Right.
both educated in Latin and in Irish. We know he was educated in Latin because he's using the Latin alphabet, and he must have been exceptionally well educated. Now, you can correct me on this one, Rachel, because you're quite educated when it comes down to languages. But he was able to, people reckon he was very educated because he was able to use the Latin alphabet with Irish. And a
Yeah,
lot of people say that would have. Yeah,
It's hard. It's
yeah,
very tricky to use an alphabet design for a completely, and I mean completely different language,
yeah.
to apply it to your own, which is why so many, phonetizations, Anglicizations, or Romanizations just don't work. So
Mm,
yeah, if he was able to come up with something that worked, that's pretty
yeah.
talented. Yeah,
I,
and
I,
very
I
very
don't.
well educated.
Yes, and that's something that really is exceptionally striking. So we obviously have letters and work from both Palladius and Saint Patrick at the time, who was going in and out of the country, sorry, the realm, um, which gives us like small little indications. But now that people are looking more and more into the Ugham stones and actually taking a step back and going, hey, wait, you'd have to be switched on to be able to work with these Ugham stones. People are now more kind of opening up their mind. Then we also know we're fully aware of Irish mercenaries that would have worked within the Roman army. And if they were
Right.
working in the Roman army, that means they're educated with Roman tactics and warfare. And we can also
Armor,
support that.
clothing, yeah,
Yeah, we can also support that with archaeology finds. When we were originally getting these archaeology finds, we assumed they were all from loot, that the Irish were just going in and robbing it, which is
oh,
true to a certain degree. They are actually attacking. We know this, that there's large standards of attacks happening in Britain. However, there's certain weapons and stuff people were assuming were sort of arcane. They were mixing weapons from like 300 BC with weapons from early medieval period.
right,
So they thought that the society was arcane. It was just a really bad assumption. The fact of the matter is that the dates wouldn't mix up. You can't be mixing up finds from 300 BC and mixing it with
right,
from the 5th century. It just goes all wrong. And the assumption that Ireland was arcane was just a flying thing that just kept going on and on and on. But it's only recently, after 1998, that we're actually starting to tidy this all up. And so now it was Colin actually this year who's gone off and done an entire report on actually Charlemagne finds, and he's been able to take the Charlemagne finds out, and he's literally quite easily pointed out that it is exceptionally kind of silly at this point in 22 what was it 2023, I think he made his report, to
right.
mix Charlemagne finds in Ireland with Roman finds from the 5th century. So it basically points out that actually Ireland was keeping up with the latest fashion and trends. So that gives us a hint and a very good indication, obviously, with trade that was going on, that Ireland in the 5th century was wearing more kind of a mixture of Roman insular clothing.
Right.
So what I mean by Roman insular is that Roman clothing, Roman fashion would have been traded and came in and influenced the Irish. And then the Irish would have given their own little style and flair to the Roman clothing and fashion that would have been in Ireland. So it does break a lot of hearts to know that the Irish
I
weren't running
know.
around in tartan clothing and stuff, and what was it, the blue paint and stuff. But
Yeah,
it is
God
what it
knows.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I think that new approach to viewing Ireland is actually connected as part of the broader trend in history in general to
Mm,
actually view the world as interconnected rather than isolated
yeah.
historically, right? In
Mm,
the 18th century there was this intellectual snobbery about, well, we the people who are now, we are far superior to anything that came before, and all of those peoples were all isolated, living in their dirty little hamlets, and they lived short, miserable lives and
mm,
wore mud, right? And that was kind of the assumption that everywhere stuck to themselves and there was no interconnectivity. But now that we're actually starting to look at the historical record with a fresh eye, we
mm,
realize that people traveled, and
mm,
people of all levels of society, not just the wealthy. The lower levels were making pilgrimages, which would definitely get them out of their village,
yeah.
if not further afield. We have records of, lower peasants making pilgrimages to Rome from England.
Mm, mm,
So, that kind of opens up the idea that fashion is not as isolated and localized as we want to believe. Because, in the
mm,
19th century, there was this move towards folk costume,
yeah.
where every region started saying, well, this is our traditional, in Brittany, this is our traditional clothing, and this is what traditional people have worn for hundreds of years. Bullshit.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
so that whole idea of folk clothing is such a modern concept, and so I
Mm,
think we're finally starting to break those myths about historical fashion. So for those who are joining, thank you for watching. Please hit that thumbs up. And if you have any questions about medieval fashion, kind of all across the continent, all the way up to Ireland, please drop it in the comments. We are happy to answer it, because otherwise we're just going to talk
Yeah,
about what we want to talk about.
yeah,
Um, so, something that, speaking of connections and similarities and differences, in the continent and in England, and God knows in Scandinavia, fashion for centuries was layers, right? You had a
yeah.
base layer, that was the layer that got laundered, that was the layer that took the brunt of abuse, then you had a layer that went over that, and then at least one more layer over that.
Mm.
I know that the sources in Ireland, or it's very hard to know because there isn't as much evidence as there might be in other places. But do we know what sort of layering might have been common, if that was similar? Was linen a common fabric for underwear, for
Yeah.
instance?
It's not until the Viking Age that we start to get a better idea of the fashion and clothing,
Mm,
because even looking at early, so when we're dealing with the kind of, as I refer to it, as the insular Roman clothing and the insular
right,
Roman fashion that was coming in, and then later on with the Charlemagne fashion and stuff, we're still in the very early stages of research into a lot of that stuff. So it's not until for us as kind of hobbyists and stuff, it's not until we get into the Viking Age that we have far better knowledge
mm,
of, for instance, to start with, that we would have had the what was it, the linen tunic that goes right underneath. Obviously,
right.
correct me on this, and then on top we
Yeah,
would have
yeah,
had the woolen tunic.
like this.
Yeah,
Linen shirt. Yeah,
yeah, of course. Then on top we would have had the woolen tunic.
right,
Then we would have had our woolen pants. Depending of where we're going in the region, we would have had socks, and we would have also had shoes and stuff, the turn shoes and that, depending where we are. We would also have a leg wraps and stuff as well to wrap around our feet. Obviously, then on top of that, we could have put the cloak on as well. One book that we use as one of the main sources in Ireland is, in fact, the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is a magnificent book at the very start of the
right,
Viking Age, just as we're going between the fashions of the Eastern Roman Empire, Charlemagne, and Viking fashion. We have the Book of Kells, which is
right.
literally an encyclopedia when it comes down to the fashion that we could find in Ireland. Sadly, we've only seen a few reenactors actually try to find projects within the Book of Kells and bring them alive, but there is reenactors that have done it out there. Most reenactors these days, they kind of default, and I'm not blaming or having to go off everyone. In fact, most of my clothing right now is actually Viking fashion. It's not fashion from the Book of Kells, which is kind of depressing in a way. But um, I think Viking fashion is a great place to start, especially if you're getting into reenactment and stuff. Um, Instead of doing much more difficult projects that are in the Book of Kells, because the Book of Kells has mostly the very high noble class drawings and stuff. Because if you look at, for example, Mary, that's in the Book of Kells, she's presented as a kind of a Byzantine woman, completely
Right.
covered in silk. I think for any living historian, that seems to be a very daunting task to find that much silk and then completely create it into something of the golden age of, no, is it the golden age of Byzantine Empire? I suppose it is the peak of
It
Byzantine
is,
Empire
because yeah, it is. It's the
fashion-wise.
peak. It's before they start
Yeah.
losing territory to every kind of steppes person who
Mm,
comes from the east. Yeah.
yeah, that's very
It's
true.
funny. So the Book of Kells, just for those who aren't familiar, that was scribed in the 7th century,
Yeah, it's around. They start the project around the, what was it, the 8th century, and they finish it in the
8th
ninth
century.
century. So they're in the middle of creating it, and then suddenly the Viking Age starts. So it's the end of the saints and scholars, and all the projects that we're doing had to go in more into the center of the Ireland, and then they had to go over some form of protection under
Right.
a Irish clan or chieftain or king, etc.
Right.
Because during the Golden Age of Ireland, what the Golden Age of Ireland is when you have all these beautiful manuscripts, all these beautiful books that could have been created on the coasts of Ireland, didn't really
Right.
need much protection and stuff. And then suddenly the Viking Age kicks in, and
Yeah, I
all these
tell you,
beautiful monastic sites are destroyed,
they
and
they
they
are
have to go more
looted
centralized.
horribly because they were completely unprotected because nothing
Yeah,
bad had ever happened to them before.
yeah. those places, you just kind of most of the attacking and fighting. Now, monastic settlements were attacked in the mainland of Ireland, and most of the political fighting was happening in the mainland. But they didn't. Nobody actually went out during the Golden Age of Ireland. Went into the coastal areas. So the coastal areas were perfectly fine because nobody was going out to attack them because that was ungodly to do.
Right.
Viking Age, the Vikings don't really care.
Then
They just
the
see a bunch of
ungodly
plunder and they're just
heathens
like, well, this
come
is
and
easy.
they, yeah.
Yeah.
It, so the Book of Kells, I have, it's funny, I've looked at it from an illumination and calligraphy perspective, but I never actually thought to uh, page through it looking for the fashions. But that, so,
Yeah.
normally books like that, they do depict, especially all of these high-ranking religious figures in whatever is the most noble clothing that the
Yeah.
author can think of. So it definitely makes sense that it would be Byzantine style fashions. Even in England,
Mm,
up to the 12th century, there's still depicting
mm,
Mary and the angels and what's very clearly Byzantine inspired clothing. So clearly that's not what the average person is wearing. They're not walking around in damaticas that
mm,
drag on the ground and silk embroidered silk garments. um, yeah,
mm,
so
mm,
that's,
mm.
but I can see why reenactors might. I have many friends, this is going to sound weird, in the living history community who have done recreations of Byzantine clothing, and it's so time consuming because of the pearls and the
Yeah.
beading and the byzants and all the embroidery and the applique layers. It's not, it's, the tailoring is relatively simple because it's geometric construction and it's not particularly fitted, but it's the
Mm,
detail, the ornamental details that are just life-sucking.
mm, mm, mm.
So I can see why maybe your Irish reenactors have sort of veered away from that
Yeah.
because of course the
It's
Norse were
just
very,
easier.
yeah, the Norse were fond of metallic ornamentation. Like they loved their jewelry. They loved their cast
Yeah.
pieces. They loved ropes of amber, right? So there's a little bit of embroidery. We have some evidence of, but the embroidery that's being done on Norse garments is much simpler than the stuff that's being carried out on Byzantine garments. There's it's definitely not the same level of. I mean, you've got royal workshops in Byzantium, so you know. Oh no, we lost Philip. Okay, he'll be back.
Oh, we're back
You're
again.
back.
Oh,
Yay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so you've got royal workshops in Constantinople who are literally just professional sewists producing on constantly. That's all they do. And I don't, my feeling is that in the first millennium we don't really quite have necessarily that level of professionalism yet
Yeah.
in
That's a
the
fact.
tailoring world. There's still a lot of
Mm, mm,
homemade clothing made by the ladies of the house rather than a tailor who has his shop in the center of town or something like that. But what, so one of the problems with Irish clothing that we don't have in Europe, I refer to the trinity of fashion history is documentary evidence, archaeological evidence, and iconographic evidence, right? When you have all three, you have that happy triangle of knowledge, and you can recreate with relative certainty a garment, right? So we frequently have that
mm,
in
mm.
on the continent. Um, in Ireland, my understanding is we have a lot of, well, a lot. We have some extant garments thanks to people falling into bogs when they're drunk or something. But what about the
Yeah.
documentary evidence and the iconographic evidence?
Well, sadly, because of the mixture of Cromwell's invasion, sorry, just before then we have Henry VIII who just cleanses the country. Then we have,
Lenses.
the sadly, the worst destruction of all happens during the period of the First World War, where we have the 1916 Rising
Oh,
and the Irish Civil
oh
War.
no.
And in that, we have the sieges of the four courts. And that's vitally important to know about because during the siege of the four courts, inside the four courts itself is all of the Irish
The
medieval
archives.
manuscripts,
Oh
which were
no.
collected, yeah, the
Oh,
archives, which were collected in the first place to protect, and only had recently happened to protect all of the medieval history, all of the Irish medieval history, because there was the fear that it would be destroyed.
No.
And so what happened is that during the siege of the forecourts, artillery fire fired into the building, destroying the medieval manuscripts. And if you actually watch the Battle of the siege of the forecourts on YouTube, you can watch all of the videos on YouTube. You can see the artillery firing in, and then there's this weird snow coming down, and that weird snow is actually all of the medieval manuscripts
Oh
burning.
no. Oh my God.
Mm.
Okay, so that's, that's a similar thing has happened all over Europe at various times, but it's hardly ever a case of, all the archives are in one place, and if this thing goes, then it's done. For Burgundy, it's very frustrating to try to research the Duchess's household, Duchess Margaret of York, Edward IV of England's sister, because all of her
Mm.
inventories, her expense accounts were all kept in an archive in Dijon that got set on fire by French revolutionaries in 1790. So
Mm.
I feel that pain, but it's worse for Ireland because you said it was basically all of the archives were just kept in this one place.
It was History Hit this week. They were interviewing Dermot Scully. Dermot Scully, who was one of my previous lecturers, has been hired by History Hit to do a few documentaries and also to do a few, which is the medieval podcast, I'm sure it's called. And Dermot Scully and a few other of the English academics have all agreed that the burning in the forecourts is probably one of the worst historical disasters to ever happen. There was even recently, I was listening to an English academic who does study between, I think he's studying on around the 100 Years' War and trying to find documentation of Irish mercenaries moving in and out of Dublin into London and then to France is a complete nightmare because the documentation doesn't exist. It's all been burned in the forecourts.
Sorry. There was a question about shoes, so I thought I'd grab some. Yeah, so that's literally heartbreaking to me because, you know, eh, and of course you've got Henry who just like burnt everything to the ground, and then Cromwell who finished
Mm.
the job. So that's two of our prongs basically gone. Um,
Mm.
for Ireland. So what does that leave in terms of sources for people who are interested in as accurately as possible recreating garments? What does that leave us with for like the 12th through 15th or 16th centuries?
So a lot of stuff that we're using is stuff that was hidden during both the what was it, stuff that hasn't been collected yet or hidden. So sometimes we're like looking through renovations of the likes of Burnratty Castle, or we're doing renovations around Waterford, and then suddenly we'll find the likes of a perfect garment. If you look at the Waterford Museum, for example, at a church, there was a perfect golden garment.
Oh wow, wait. Waterford,
Walls
where is Waterford is where?
peak of east of the country. So literally just it's a port city, and it was a Viking port in the southeast of the country.
Right. Okay. Wow. So the has that dress, you said it was a gown, right? Has that been published
Yeah.
anywhere? Because I haven't heard about that, and I try
Yeah,
to stay
yeah.
on top of all of the extant garments because that's like the biggest point of our Trinity are the extant garments. Great. I'll have to look that up. Do you know where it was published?
I sent it on to you before. It's the one I sent you on to before, wasn't it? The
Well,
one on
we
Waterford.
I don't recall a link on something from
Maybe
Waterford.
I'm
We talked.
describing it incorrectly.
I'll have to look back and see, but not right now. So we actually have a question. I'd love to talk about, or a request. I'd love to talk about footwear for Kerns in the 15th and 16th centuries. Um, so yeah, I obviously I probably don't have any of that kind of footwear. Although if Philip starts talking and I see something that looks alike, I'll show it to you. But we'll kind of we started talking about footwear, so we'll keep talking about footwear. So Philip, what can you tell us about 15th and 16th century footwear? And actually, could you
Well,
explain
for
what
the
a cairn
most part,
is?
obviously.
Because I think a lot of my viewers will have no
So,
idea what that is or who that is or what kind of person that is.
mm, the nobility. There is assumption once again because they run around with no shoes on most of the time that they're actually like poor peasants and
Mhm.
stuff, but they're actually not. If you actually look at the weaponry and stuff that they do have on, also people assume as well that they're low peasantry because they have no armor on. They don't wear any armors. And so people assume straight away that these are like very low class people. But in fact, weaponry that they have straight away, which is mostly a buckler and a sword, actually we can find straight away that to use those two weapons and to use it successfully to actually even, you know, end the night, um,
Right.
you pretty much have to have a very, very high standard level of martial art. A buckler, if you've ever studied martial arts or anything, a buckler and a sword
Yeah,
is actually very difficult to be able to use successfully, to
it
be able to
is.
parry
Yeah.
and then be able to get the blow.
My ex-husband
So
was
the
masterful with the buckler and sword. Like he could take anyone out with it, but it took a long time for him. And his buckler
uh,
was like this big. It was itty bitty. Uh,
yeah,
but it's a real I love watching sword and buckler fights because you really see like it's artistry, right? A good sword and buckler fight is beautiful to
mm,
watch because they really have to move and move well, or otherwise it ends
mm,
like that. So the cairns were
yeah.
I you unfortunately you cut out there was a connection issue. Are did you say artists?
Oh, martial artists. Martial
Martial artists.
artists.
Okay, martial artists.
Sorry.
Are they mercenaries or are they part of the feudal the feudal
Yeah, you
structure?
can get them. So they could either be attached onto a household or a clan, or they can actually be mercenaries. Both the Fitzgeralds over in Kerry and also the English actually took on a lot of Kerns as mercenaries. They are massively effective in the Hundred Years' War, and very effective in Ireland. Not so effective in England. Many of them get killed very, very quickly in England
Mm,
because they can't compete against the English longbowmen in
right.
England. So there's no stories, or sorry, not stories. There's no battles successful in England. If one thing, they're kind of leading us astray in England and battles in the Wars of the Roses. However, the usage of them in the Hundred Years' War under Edward III is actually very effective because they're very, very good at jumping on their horses, the hobbler horse, and then going
Mhm.
off and burning villages as part of the English tactics.
Yeah.
So the Kerns are very,
It was
very
a
good at that.
good happy time to be a French peasant. Um,
Yeah.
so the shoes that they would have been wearing, I have what men in 15th century England, basically everywhere in Europe were wearing. I can't speak. So this is a turn shoe. It's a boot. You can see it's definitely been worn. It comes up like just above the ankle and it's got three buckles for complete adjustability. So is this the sort of shoe that a Cairn would have been wearing or would they have been wearing something different?
Yes, most likely when would have been wearing shoes like that. What particular finds that we have, we don't really know, because the majority of Kerns that are depicted in literature and drawings and stuff mostly go barefoot.
Right.
And most annoying thing as well is when the tutors come in, they constantly want to depict the Kerns as being savages.
Right.
So they're constantly seen as big, massive beards like myself, long, shaggy hair like myself,
Right.
and
Of
also
course.
their clothing, although of the noble class, when you pay attention to it, feature, and that's the plan that the tutors have. The tutors want to make the symbol of the kern look as savage as
Of
possible.
course. Well,
But obviously, outside them, because these guys are.
well, that really ties in with, the medieval idea of the wild man, which was used to, scare people, that whole
Yeah.
concept of so it's very easy to go from general myth of wild man to, oh, look, Ireland, the wild men, there they are. We must conquer them and
Yes, a
civilize
hundred
them. So
percent.
here's a raison d'être. Let's go do it, right? So you
Mm.
would think then when they did wear shoes that it would be probably, I mean, there's only so many options of things you can do with, you know, the technology they had and the leather, the materials that they had. And, you know, one of the problems with these shoes in general that nearly all living historians, practitioners of living history have realized is the way we move modernly, we've learned to base our balance on rubber soles that have grip. These got no grip. When you're stepping
Yes.
on surfaces, if your balance is not perfect, and let's say you're moving, you're going to slip and fall on some part of your body that shouldn't be on the ground. So, you know, there's theories amongst European reenactors about, well, maybe they attached rope to the sole for added grip, even though I don't think there's any actual evidence for that. Some people say, well, what about hobnails? Again, the Romans had hobnails, but I haven't found any evidence of that pre-16th century. So is there,
Yeah.
in the archaeological evidence in Ireland, is there any indication about some way to create grip, or are we just, you know, is it just a question of we need to learn to move differently in historical clothing?
So from my research, and anybody in the comment section that wants to correct me, but from my research, I could only find in the early medieval period in the Vikings, and this is Dublin alone. I haven't found anything in Waterford and Cork yet,
Right.
but in Dublin alone, there are spikes. People have these attachments that they tie on to the shoe as spikes to be able to walk around Dublin and
Oh,
stuff.
interesting.
But other than that, I'm unaware of anything else.
Yeah,
But
so we
obviously,
have
anyone in the comment section can easily correct me on that.
in Europe, we have, oh, I don't know where my patents are. Unfortunately, my prop man has gone to the gym. Um,
Mm,
in Europe, in nearly all of Europe that I'm familiar with, from the Italies to Spain, Germany, the Empire, you know, the Baltic states, they had wooden overshoes that are called pattens, or in English, Trippen in German, and you know, PNL in Italian. They've all got different names, but they're various kinds of wooden uh, like super soles that you basically
mm,
attach to your shoe, and it lifts you out of the mud, provides grip. But running in them, I've done it, and doing things like dancing in them is an awful experience. So they you know, I can't
mm, mm.
iron spikes. I can't imagine that might give you too much grip actually, when you're trying to, you know, do
Yeah.
things like pivot
So,
on the moment.
mm, mm. So if you look at depictions then of them actually going out to fight in Ireland, they're mostly taking their shoes off. We can see that both in the Book of Kells and in
Right,
Tudor depictions of them being
right.
barefoot out in the countryside, which fits all the way to the description
Mm,
of the countryside, taking their shoes off to do martial arts, which, in my opinion, doing living history, Um, I've done it both with the shoes on and the shoes off, and gee, it's so slippery with the shoes on. You know,
right.
we have depictions all the way to the American Civil War of people slipping over mud and dirt and various other bits and bobs. And yeah, I do believe that tripping on muddy surfaces is very, very easy to do, and I could easily imagine that.
Right. Well,
The rambling endless of hours, especially obviously in the comment section want me to go interview for further details, I've no problem doing that as well.
so we have a question, because
Oh
you've
no.
broken up a little bit. I'm not certain why Japan doesn't have some of the best internet in the world. Anyway, do the Kerns wear a kind of, is this a real word? Pamputi? Is that a real word? That's an adorable word. Yeah. From Brian, do the Kerns wear a kind of pamputi?
I think you're
Pamputi? Pamputi? I don't know. I don't know where the accent on that word is.
I think I know what you mean. Give us one moment there.
That's an adorable word. I love that word so much as a linguist. Um, while you're looking that up, a comment from Elizabeth. Hi,
There
Elizabeth.
is
It's
a
great to see you
possibility.
again. Go on.
The Pompey shoes is a Bronze Age shoes. Do the Kerns wear them? I doubt it, given the status of the Kerns and the fact that if they do go into it, in my opinion, no, and I'm actually easy up to people to counter me. In my opinion, if a Kern does go into a settlement, they'll either wear standard shoes up to a what was it called? A noble level shoes. So they're going to either have shoes that really show off their bling, like you would have seen with the Lance Canet, or they're going to wear regular shoes. I don't see them, the
Right.
Kerns, ever wearing low standard shoes at all. That's my opinion about the Kerns, just because of the status of the Kerns and stuff. Like the Kerns, I can't highlight this enough. If you know who the Lance Canet are in Germany, that's the standard of the Kerns. Those sort of Bronze Age
Right.
shoes are very kind of, in my opinion, just for the working class and stuff. But obviously, if anyone, yeah, they, as my wife was saying there, those shoes are very disposable shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, real wear and tear items. Actually, most, the funny thing is that most your average medieval turn shoe was it was basically a disposable item. Like we have so many of these tossed into latrines as garbage when it
Mm,
gets to the point where the soles can't be repaired anymore. So, there's the
mm,
it's funny what was considered a wear and tear consumable. Um, Thankfully,
mm,
normally that would biodegrade, but thanks to the conditions in old toilets, they didn't.
mm,
So, let's one of the comments was that from Elizabeth, she's tried fencing with what she calls period style shoes. So, leather soles, and it was a disaster. I was slip sliding everywhere.
yes. My God,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know that from a lot of my harness fighting friends who do 15th century harness fighting, not this stupid modern HEMA crap. No opinion there. Yeah, it's gonna
Mm,
get me some hate. Anyway, um, that who do, they have retrained how they move so that
mm,
they distribute their weight differently, they step differently, and it works. They're the people who have
mm,
done that don't slide anymore. So I think the
mm,
problem is that modern shoes have broken us actually, and it might even
yeah.
cause most of the musculoskeletal issues we have. Modern shoes have
Mm,
really broken us and trained us to move in ways that are actually counterproductive when you don't
yeah.
have shoes, especially with the heel that kind of shortens your calf muscle and all that. So I
Mhm.
my opinion based on everything that I've experienced over almost 30 years of doing this silliness, is that it's the same thing with the clothes, right? Some people say, "Oh, medieval clothes, they're so uncomfortable." It's like, no, you have a modern idea of what
Yeah.
comfort is. When you wear them long enough, your idea of comfort changes. When you
Yes.
wear turn shoes like this and walk long distances in them, as I have,
Mm,
and do different things in them, you learn to move differently
mm,
and maybe even in a better fashion for your own constitution.
mm,
Um, so, talking about overshoes, so they had spikes, you said, iron, like basically like crampons in
mm.
Dublin.
Sorry,
Like,
say that again.
do you know what a crampon is?
Not
they're
sure. My
they're
wife
they're
knows.
they're like spike shoes
Oh
soles
yeah.
that you put on your shoes to go hiking in the mountain in the
Oh
icy
yeah.
mountains,
Yeah,
right?
that
Like to
seems to be from what I've seen. That seems to be, if you're looking for grip when walking around Dublin, that seems to be the finds that have been found.
That makes sense.
Um, yeah,
Because
yeah.
it was because they're assuming the roads weren't paved. They were dirt. It was dirt squares and dirt roads probably in
It
the first millennium.
seems to be because like when Dublin Vikings first started, it was a trade port that was very kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Sort of probably anarchy-ish, very very cramped, very like in my view, especially very early on, it's very very cramped and very muddy, and you would have constantly
Right.
had like fresh trade coming in and all that stuff. Obviously, my wife is in the background coming up with her own theories and stuff of how Dublin would have looked at the start. Um, you'll probably end up having a deep conversation later. But
I knew
I
the HEMA
can,
comment would get attention.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
um,
so yeah, it's funny. People imagine, if they go to say Florence now, they go and they say, "Oh yes, this was what medieval Florence was like," and I'm like, sort of, but
yeah.
the roads weren't all paved, or
Mm,
even by the 15th century, a lot of cities still had packed dirt roads, right? They hadn't actually a lot of
yeah.
places in Europe hadn't paved yet. So
Like,
you've got mud, you've
mm,
got animal feces, you've got people
mm,
tossing in some cases their chamber pots out their
yeah,
windows. So you've got pretty a pretty horrible situation for walking
yeah.
around, which is why in many
Which,
places in Europe, By the
Yeah.
15th century, they've, for women, they've developed what someone might, oh, look at that fashionable mule. Is that a Prada? No, this is a Beatrice d'Este.
Yeah.
um, so, they've got these platform shoes that women are wearing to get their hems out of the mud when they go out. And I actually wore this pair. I actually walked around. Ryan actually made these for me. They've got a cork interior, so they're
Mm.
actually kind of squishy, which makes it really actually comfortable for walking. And I walked around. I spent a whole day in Florence walking around in these in 15th century
Wow.
clothing, and I went everywhere. I went to the gardens. I climbed up to the top of the Palazzo Vecchio. I walked miles and miles and miles in them. And my observation is that they're very good for flat surfaces, and they're super awesome for crossing mud puddles.
Mm, mm, mm.
They're not good for off-roading. These are
Yeah.
these are city shoes.
Mm,
These are mud shoes. These are city shoes. They're not good for like hiking in up mountains or hills. Like literally, you just slip out of them. So
mm.
yeah. So footwear is definitely an interesting topic, and a lot
Yeah.
of people, for a lot of people, they'll say, well, that's the one part of my kit I'll compromise. I'll wear modern footwear because I can't wear medieval footwear. But the reality is that if you talk to, orthopedics surgeons who haven't been corrupted by big shoe, they'll
Yes.
tell you that it's actually better if you don't contort your foot in weird ways with modern footwear. So
Yeah. It's a
to
fact.
the comment, ooh, HEMA slander, I'd love for you to elaborate. Well,
Oh, okay. Where's the shovel
uh,
there? Do you want the shovel, Rachel?
no, I'm good. I think the comment says stands on its own. I will if I will be happy to host a chat like that with my patrons in the privacy of a Zoom room.
Yeah.
I will
Uh,
just say that this is my general observation of any historic practice,
mm,
whether it's dance or martial arts.
thank you so
The,
much.
the second you divorce a historic practice from its
Mm,
culture, you've ceased to understand it.
yeah,
And I don't
I
believe
have to
you
agree
can
there.
actually perform it properly without wearing the gear, the
Mm,
clothing in which that activity was created, right?
mm, it's very
So
true.
people who do 15th century dance wearing modern clothing, they don't understand what 15th century dance actually is.
Mm, mm, mm.
People who do 15th century combat wearing sweatpants and a zip up jacket don't understand what 15th century combat actually was. They can't, because the clothing influences so much how people were able to move,
Mm, mm.
right? And the second you don't understand the culture, because medieval martial arts are not just a pure martial art. They were not. They were part of a whole very intricate set of beliefs
Yeah.
and interactions and social hierarchy. And the second you fail to understand that aspect of it, you can't really appreciate the art for itself. So that's my
Mm.
general view of HEMA.
I
If
think.
there's no
uh,
H, if you don't actually honor the history, then it can't be
mm,
HEMA. It's just EMA,
yeah, yeah. Mm,
right?
I think
What
he
are
was
your
more.
thoughts, Philip? Would you like a shovel?
Yeah, yeah. I think I'll take Matt Easton's shovel there and borrow it for a wee bit. Yeah, I think it's always been a massive. No, I don't do HEMA, so I'm an outsider now, complete outsider when it comes down to all of that stuff. And my martial art isn't even that high standard, to be quite honest with you. But from my understanding and the little kind of experimental martial art I have done, God, wearing the clothing of that period is vitally important. When I was doing the Viking martial arts and stuff, the shocked. Everyone else was wearing a leather shoes, modern leather on their early medieval shoes, and they were getting amazing grip, and they were producing this specific style of martial art, but it wasn't really fitting the what depictions we have in the Book of Kells, like the long stances and stuff. And I think you made a very good point that when you wear those kind of shoes, your body naturally has to do certain stuff, and long stances come out when you're wearing, certain grip and stuff. But I noticed I was slipping and falling everywhere, so I dropped the shoes. I thought the shoes were stupid and started running around barefoot. But then I noticed straight away, because this was very early on, that the Kerns and the man in the Book of Kells, none of them were wearing shoes. So to me, it made perfect sense. Take off your
Right.
shoes when fighting in Ireland because it is very muddy, very slippery. And then when you're in the battle or the skirmish itself, you've got extra bits and bobs on the floor that you're going to slip on.
Right.
So yeah,
Yes, from people.
yes. Um, so I think definitely the removal of the shoes in Ireland is a need. And then from there, when you're on the slippery ground and stuff, you're going to produce slightly different results than you would have done in HEMA. However, I think HEMA is a good place to start with the fundamentals and the basics in a safe environment. But I do think you need to get into the experimental side of living history, like myself and the Nightly Lady and the Rambling Kern and all these
Right.
people. Like it would be amazing to round them up and then bring them up to the Wicklow Mountains so we can get actual results to why the Sherberg armor is magnificent and fantastic when working in the mainland of Europe. But why does it fail against Kerns with no armor on? Why are Kerns with
Right.
no armor able to beat them and beat them and beat them again in the mountains of Wicklow? But if we were to do the same practice again in the likes of southern Germany or northern Italy,
In any
the
sort of
armor,
flat field
yeah,
environment, right?
yeah, the Arbor Knight would obliterate the Kern. Like, and just no, you can see that with the Battle of Stokefield in England. Like the Arbor Knight just easily just knocks the poor little naked Kern to the side. And in fact, the literature in England just is like it cannot understand why are these Kerns with no armor on. That makes absolutely no sense. But if you were to do the same practice again in Wicklow, completely different. If one thing,
Right.
it's like why are these Armor Knights dressed like this?
So we've got a whole string of comments now.
Mm,
Okay, need to get into those chainmail undies for ponces. So chainmail undies. So I was just at Leeds, the Leeds Royal Armory, which
mm,
if you haven't been to, you should absolutely go.
mm,
And they actually have an extant 15th century pair of ponces on display.
mm, mm,
And those are the chainmail, they're actually chainmail brays. And that is the kind of protection that 15th century men at arms had to protect bits that until Henry VIII's field of the cloth of gold armor, the only way to do it was with that area because of the flexibility you need to be able to actually move was with this
mm,
chain mail. But there is literally no way that a man was wearing those ponces over his bare skin, people. He was wearing linen brace, okay? They were
mm.
wearing linen brace and probably hosen under those ponces. They would not have just put those ponces over their bare bits. Philip, have you
Yeah.
ever tried putting chainmail underwear on your bare bits?
To be honest with you, there's a lot of things that make my certain area uncomfortable, and I could imagine that wouldn't. Yeah, I think that would add to the uncomfortability by a lot. By the way,
Yeah,
yeah, I can see it's
yeah.
working. To be honest with you.
But these ponces are actually really amazing because, and I'm about to publish a video of my visit to the Leeds Armory actually, because there was some really interesting things. The
Mm,
ponces are actually designed so that they're kind of fitted-ish to your hips, but there's these
mm,
extra panels, these wings that then
mm,
close
mm,
over the front. So you've got like it's like a skirt, it's like a chainmail skirt
mm,
worn
mm, mm,
to give extra protection to those bits, which
mm.
I have to imagine would be, even though I don't have those bits, but I would have to imagine that would be more comfortable than the modern
Yeah,
cup and
yeah,
jock
I can
strap.
imagine that.
uh, Although perhaps I can't speak to the actual level of protection ponce versus cup, but I know
Mm,
a lot of my friends who do harness fighting, they don't wear a cup and
mm,
they just wear a chainmail fald and just
mm.
hope that no one aims for that area of their body.
Yeah, I was it was in Denmark. You're warned if you ever do the living history in Denmark. When I was doing the big massive battle over there, 300 men against the 300 men, we were told beforehand, bring a cup, because you have Danish women that love. They call them the Nutcracker women, and they love because in Danish rules, you're allowed to hit around the groin area. There's no punishments or anything like. So you have the Nutcracker women with they have these spears, the
The
short spears they're called,
nutcracker women.
and they will literally just quickly snap at your groin area and it will knock you out of it. And they're allowed to eliminate you that way with no penalties to them. obviously different martial arts have different rule sets and stuff, but in Denmark,
Right.
no, you're wearing a cup. And if you don't have a wearing a cup, then you can pray to the Almighty Lord.
Yeah, in certain in actually several organizations of which I'm part, it's perfectly legitimate to aim for the groin.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
no, absolutely.
Okay, so we had a comment. It was snowing here yesterday, and I was out shopping in my medieval shoes just to see how they work in this kind of weather, and it was actually fine. So
Oh,
yeah, I have, like I said, I've worn my medieval shoes the hell and all over the place. But when I will say that when I wear my turn shoes, I wear
yeah.
wooden pattens with them, or
Ah,
I wear this. I never I've destroyed turn shoes wearing them
yeah,
on modern surfaces without patents. Like literally
that's
walked through them in a day
yeah, yeah,
because these are not designed for concrete, for asphalt, for even
yeah,
cobblestones.
yeah.
They're designed to be worn on smooth surfaces and mud, and the idea is you are supposed to wear wooden overshoes. So Nicole, if you're still there, my question for you is, did you wear pattens or just the leather shoes? Okay, while we're waiting for that answer, Ryan O'Malley says Matt Easton marching with furious intent. Uh, and then he says, I think it's best we currently, talking about HEMA. I think it's the best we currently have. There's no reason one can't practice HEMA in period clothing, and people do. I agree with you. My objection is not to HEMA in general, it's to the people who have subscribed to the Church of HEMA Blacks.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like I said, I, I believe in the reconstruction and recreation of historical fighting manuals. I just believe it needs to be done in its proper context with the proper clothing. That's my personal opinion. And yes, it is better than Bohort. Bohort is an abomination. This is going to also get me excoriated in the comments, probably. Bohort is an abomination, and no one should do that.
I'm keeping my mouth shut, and I have too many people on
That's
my side
okay.
that do
In
it.
in for a penny, in for a pound.
I
Oh my God. Oh, Nicole has a funny comment. You'll need balls of steel.
no, yes, yes, yes. We're traveling around Denmark. Yes, yes, yes.
And then Nicole says, in answer to my question about whether she wore the shoes or the patents, or with patents, she said just the shoes. So Nicole, I'm going to advise you not to do that too often because you will destroy your shoes really quickly. They're just not meant for modern surfaces. I mean, it's one thing if you're like getting from the car to a nice smooth store floor, but if it's actually walking outside, take it from me, I've destroyed so many of these shoes doing that. Comment. Let's see. Henry VIII's huge armor makes me wonder how many heart attacks he had because he was fat. FAT capitals. Do we have examples of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor's armor or armor of the Sforzas? I know we have Charles V's childhood armor because I saw it in the Last Night exhibit that was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art 5 years ago. I I don't know how much. I'm
Yeah,
certain I'm certain that some of his
yeah, the
adult suits
same.
of armor survived. There's no way they couldn't have.
Yeah. Because what was it, Charles V, because he
Yeah,
looked up to Maximilian so much, he was also another person that was collecting a lot of Maximilian finds
right.
after Maximilian's death. And then he was also trying to recreate a lot of the stuff that Maximilian had done. No, to be honest with you, I wouldn't quote from me. When it comes down to Maximilian armor and that whole entire category, I could, chuck stuff out, but don't take anything I say as any form of fact. Go and do your own research when it comes
Right,
down to
yeah.
Maximilian
Yeah, I
armor.
would I would say it's very likely that there
Mm,
is that in the especially the Kaiserhof in Vienna. I'm
mm,
confident. I'm confident that in the massive collection that they
yeah,
have at the museum in Vienna, that there are, because the you if you for those of you who are interested in clothing and armor from the 15th century, you have to go to Vienna
mm,
because the empire collected and held on to things, and no one seems to have, with the exception of the siege of Vienna, which didn't do much damage on the inside, no one seems to have bombed it back into the Stone Age. So yeah, it's a good place to go and find medieval
yeah.
artifacts.
Nice.
Um, comment, if you don't mind a drastic change of subject, never mind a drastic change of subject, Elizabeth, have you addressed maternity clothes on your channel? I have not yet. Well, I have, but I haven't. I mean, I haven't directly, but I have discussed it actually when I was talking about this garment. So this is a gamora. This is
Mm,
15th century Florentine gown. This is sort of the layer that's worn over the linen gown. And if you start looking for it, you'll find it. You start looking at the hem in imagery of women wearing these, you're going to see a pleat tuck
mm,
all the
mm,
way
mm,
around all the way around the skirts in the front. And that pleat tuck, I'm pretty certain, was there to accommodate a pregnancy, so that when your belly started to get big, you took out the pleat and the skirts reached the ground still.
mm, mm,
So, it's medieval clothing is much better for pregnant women, and it was designed for pregnant women because women
mm,
spent most of their life either pregnant or just pregnant. So they kind of always had that belly, that fecund belly once they got married. And
mm,
so what you have, you see these laces here, right? So having this lacing really allows me complete flexibility about growth of belly. So I could actually lace this garment from only here to here and leave this rest completely unlaced, and the skirts would just kind of open up, and the this garment is voluminous enough to take that. And of course, I'm
mm,
going to be wearing something over this. This is I'm You all are seeing me in my half dressed, I'm at home with some friends look, not my I'm out in public look, because you'd have a gown to go over top of it like this. But they clothes were designed to allow for that flexibility. And if you start looking, especially in the 15th century, you start seeing lacing on the sides as well, because as garments get more and more fitted, and women are like, well, I can't really afford to have a maternity dress and a not maternity dress. I can just have
mm,
a dress. So you start seeing lacing on the sides and in the front. And if you look at, like, especially depictions of the Virgin Mary, if the La Madonna del Parto, the pregnant Virgin, then
mm,
you'll actually see her, especially in Italy, in gowns that are open on the side. The lacing is loosely done,
mm,
and so that it just allows it to expand to compensate for that belly. So
mm.
yeah, maternity, there wasn't really maternity clothes. There were clothes that were designed to allow for a pregnancy. I think is probably the long and short of it. And I actually could do a video on how to do that. Would actually probably be a really popular video.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
love to watch that.
maternity clothing, and how to make your clothes pregnancy friendly.
Mm, mm.
In Ireland, I assume it must be pretty similar, that the clothes are just sort of designed to adapt for that.
I'm
Is
going to take the default and just if I was to have time to actually research that, I would say my guess would be to copy a lot of, well, look into whatever Scotland and England is doing, and then go from there. When it comes down to maternal women's clothing, no clue. But my assumption would be definitely to start from Scotland and England and see what they're doing,
right,
because whatever Scotland and England is doing is definitely influencing. Was it Ireland, with especially the way the O'Neills are flying between their own area in the north of Ireland into the Stuarts' court. Like the
right,
Stuarts and the O'Neills are just really, really super close. And there a lot of the likes of Sean Duffy and various other historians who always talk about medieval Ireland. If you would hop onto a boat and go between the Highlands of Scotland
right.
and Ireland, what was it, the north part of Ireland, you wouldn't have known a difference. They were speaking the same Gaelic language in that area. Now I'm talking
Uh,
about the Highlands, not the Lowlands.
right,
Yeah, obviously in the Lowlands, completely different people, different culture, etc. But between the Highlands to the north part of Ireland, very similar Gaelic language, very similar culture. A lot of them were heavily related to each other. And that, like, even like if a fight breaks off on one side, the only thing that breaks the chain between the two, and that's why keeps getting attacked, is Carrickfergus. The English built a castle called Carrickfergus, and from there they used boats to try to attack the O'Neills and the
hmm,
likes of the O'Neills, the MacDonalds, the MacLeods, and the Stuarts going between the two. And of course, what happens? They go and attack and siege Carrickfergus during the Gaelic resurgence between 1370 all the way to 1420, to make sure the English aren't attacking them and committing piracy, etc., on them. But it was like, according to Sean Duffy and the likes, it was, you wouldn't have known the difference between the two. And because of that, definitely look to see what the Scottish are doing
Oh,
when it
right,
comes down to that forms of clothing, to see what the O'Neills, the O'Donnells, and then the O'Connors and stuff are doing with their clothing. And then vice versa for the likes of the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds. If you're asking those sort of questions, I would look to England, because
mm,
I find this absolutely hilarious, is the fact during the Gaelic resurgence, you have the Butler Ormond War, and sorry, no, the Talbot Ormond War, and during, sorry, the feud, the Talbot Ormond feud, which was basically Ireland versus England.
right.
But
As such,
this is where it gets very funny. I was reading this in one of the secondary sources, a paper that was done up on JSTOR, and in the middle of this feud, Talbot goes off to France because he's doing two campaigns at once. He's doing a
right,
campaign in Ireland against the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds. He's also doing another campaign against Joan of Arc, because this is the same period as Joan of Arc. And while he's over fighting Joan of Arc, the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds, they're like, oh, let's go see our cousins. And they hop on a boat in Dublin. They go up to Dublin, right, which is meant to be ran by the English. Get a boat there, go to England and see Butler's cousins.
right,
Which gives you a really good idea that movement between the two cultures hasn't stopped. And the archaeology supports that as well, because any archaeology we find around the likes of the O'Brien territory, the Fitzgerald territory, they're all very English influenced clothing. They're exactly like the clothing that you're wearing today. That's the kind of finds that we're getting around Clare and Fitzgerald territories and stuff, which gives us a more kind of an Anglo-Irish style of clothing
right,
that's worn in the southeast of the country. So in the southeast of the country, we're dealing with more of Anglo-Irish clothing and fashion, and we have movement going between Bristol and Waterford and Dublin and various other places. And then up in the north, west of the country, we have more of the Scottish influences coming in. So
right.
definitely, if we were to look in and investigate, definitely see what Scotland and England are doing, and then go from there. Is what I would advise.
Right. So we've got some comments here about the maternity stuff. So I've a comment from Elizabeth. I feel like a lot of your, being mine, not Philip's, outfits would not work well for pregnancy and nursing.
Mm,
And most of your fancy outfits have a lot of layers, so I imagine it would take a lot of effort to get your baby his meal well.
mm,
I the layers, I'll be honest, I'm not gonna demonstrate it because YouTube will destroy my channel forever if I were. It is really not hard in this outfit in any, even with all these layers, they're kind of
mm,
low cut. It is not hard to access the required implements for nursing a baby. It really isn't. And like I said, on the lacing, you just have to if you undo it up to here, because this is where the belly forms, it's fine. But the reality is that um, the lower class women, their clothes just weren't as fitted. They weren't as
mm,
tailored. They just weren't. So their garments were more voluminous, and you're still going to wear all these layers because it's cold. It's
mm,
cold in the winter, and especially in the lower classes, you can't afford heavy tapestries to keep your walls extra warm.
mm,
So you need all those layers. It's just a question of custom, right? You just learn how to do it. Um,
mm,
but the reality is that a lot of women didn't nurse their own babies. They had wet nurses for that.
mm,
Right. So you had a woman whose entire job was just wet nursing. Now, if we want to do a video on wet nurse clothing, that's a different topic because they would actually design under smocks like this, these layers, these linen layers, to
mm,
actually have slits right over the breasts so that you undo the lacing and you just pop the breast through the slit in your camicia. And then when it's done, you just rearrange it, lace it back up, and you're good to go. So,
mm, mm,
they could make accommodations like that, but you're still good, as far as we can tell, you still wear all these layers. There's a great portrait of Agnès Sorel, you might pronounce her name Agnes, who was the famous or infamous mistress of Charles VII of England and or of France, and she's got this really famous portrait where she's in a kind of a kirtle like this, very, very fitted. And she's got this really fine plucked brow, and her hair is drawn back, and the front of the gown is open, and this perfect apple breast is
Mm,
sticking out, and she's holding the baby Jesus, right? So that gives you an indication that that's exactly what they did. They unlaced the kirtle and breastfed the baby, and then laced it
mm,
back up again. I think it's another question of what we consider modernly to be convenient is not the same as the 15th century idea of convenience,
mm.
right? We live a much faster life. They didn't. They
Yeah,
lived a much slower life and probably had less anxiety because of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. God, yeah. When a lot of people talk about the medieval period and stuff and the stresses and how are people so depressed today? And it's like different type of lifestyle.
Different type
More
of
days off to
lifestyle.
start with. More kind of like don't it's a very funny one because obviously women would have been very stressed out when it comes down to giving birth and stuff and everything to do with birth, especially with the high fatality rate. Um, but then men would have been obviously very, very stressed out when it came down to warfare. Like, because if you're dealing with a man who lives in the west side of Ireland, there's not really much to be stressed about. If you're dealing with a man who lives in the east side of Ireland, there's a lot to be stressed about, when you're coming down from the early medieval period with Viking attacks, and then you're going into the late medieval period where you have the English burning and destroying your crops, and then you have the local lord comes, picks you up, and you're sent off to the battlefield.
Right.
I
I
did
think I
a
think I feel like it's more episodic, right? Like the modern stress is constant. Like we have this
mm,
anxiety to do,
yeah,
be, we must be at this place at this time, we have to be at this
yes,
place at this time, right? The clock has kind of broken us,
mm,
actually. It's killed our mental health.
yeah,
Whereas in medieval life, for the most part, your daily life was pretty relaxed. You knew
yeah,
you had a rhythm, you did the rhythm, but the rhythm was at a normal human pace, not accelerated by machinery. And then
mm,
occasionally there were really horribly, deadly, stressful incidents, like when the
yes,
Armagnacs come through your village and set it on fire. But that
mm,
that didn't happen every day. Like we have, it's what if it bleeds, it reads, right?
yeah,
So our idea of history is that there's just always violence. It's always
yeah,
violent, and it's people are always dying. But if that were true, we would not have survived as a species.
yes, it's very true. Um,
So yeah, I
it, wa-
think I feel we need to remember that it wasn't daily attacks by roving knights, and
yes,
there was a battle season. Just like I'm
yes,
confident in Ireland, there was a battle season too. People
yes,
probably weren't
coming up
doing it
to
in the
around
winter.
February. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just up to February goes into cattle raiding season, so we more or less revolve around the cattle raiding season. It's kind of a thing that everyone gets involved with. So if you're dealing more in the southeast side of the country, you're dealing with more cities and more settlements. So you would have seen conventional fighting. So, but on top of that, it's very rare that you have massive wars happening in Ireland. It's only during the period of the Gaelic resurgence or the Viking Age that you see big conventional warfare. Most warfare that happens in Ireland is kind of like the Irish banter sort of warfare, where they're going up to the more of the northwest of the country to commit cattle raiding, as in robbing each other's cattle. And a lot, even the Anglo Irish have armor that is adjusted for cattle raiding warfare. Going into other tuits, which is the clans and the little kingdoms in Ireland, and just robbing their cattle and forcing them into submission, because where you're dealing with cities, where they're dealing with currency, coins and stuff. Out in the
Right.
northwest of the country, cattle is the currency, and the reason for that is because you can eat cattle. You can't out in the northwest. You can't eat coinage. The
You,
cattle
you can't
are
you can't
like,
eat it anywhere, Philip. No one can
yeah.
eat coinage.
What? That's not what I got told in New York. Um, so in the northwest of the country, it is hide, dairy, and meat that is vital. And so because it's so vital, it becomes the currency. And so if you want to quickly subdue another Tuat clan or kingdom, just rob all their cattle. That's pretty much all their currency, their livelihood gone. It's stolen. And so they're
Right.
forced to come up to you then and submit and homage until the next season. So this becomes a seasonal thing of people quickly stealing as much cattle as they can come around February. So you would have been given, from my interpretation of the literature, given that male shocknell, around 980 goes around looking for a submission. Um, it seems to me that it's around Christmas time that they're basically told to submit, and then by February, if they haven't submit by then you've got all the cattle raiding that happens. That's my interpretation of the literature and
Right.
stuff. And it's more of a banter thing that it happens. So I steal your cattle this season, then the next season you'll steal my cattle back and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. It's
it's
a massive part of the literature as well with the Táin Bó Cúailnge, where you've got the big, humongous raid that happens between Connacht and Ulster when Queen Maeve goes into the Ulster territories to steal one of their main prized what was it, cow, which is it then turns it goes from like a small scale cattle raid to humongous, massive conventional battle. So yeah, it's very much prized in what was it called, medieval literature because it's a part of the Irish banter. So that's continuous and it's great as well because not too many civilians are then killed in the fighting between two rival clans or kingdoms, etc. It's more or less local between the local war bands and between just robbing cattle and stuff. So you've got lower casualty rate and a lot less peasants are killed because of the fighting between two clans and so on.
it seems like a more sensible way to wage war.
That's what I
Uh,
think. I think
al
it's far more
al
civilized.
um, it's a Irish word for road translates to cattle path. That
Yeah,
makes sense. That makes
it
sense.
definitely the person that's there is my wife Yuki. She actually did a load of work in archaeology while she was doing in university on roads in Ireland. And also on top of that as well, the roads in Ireland in the early medieval period was designed not just for armies but also for carts to go, not carts, chariots. So it's more evidence for chariots in Ireland as well, the usage of chariots to go up and down. And there's also special laws that are brought in as well during battles that the roads are just primarily used for the movement of chariots going in and out of a battlefield because obviously
Right.
while you're fighting line fighting, spears would have been broken, men would have been broken, and whilst we have men need to eat and drink water while they're going in and out of the battle. So you would have had chariots that would have been primary closed and used just for the battlefield itself. Most famously, the Battle of Clontarf, where you would have had the what was it called, the men of Dublin, and also Brian Brew as well, whose men the chariots would have gone in and out of the battle constantly. But then you
Yeah,
also have the other.
chariots are, you know, chariot warfare had left the European continent a long time before that. It's very interesting that it kind of survived in Ireland longer than in other places.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of people do make a big deal about that as well. But it's mostly just used for movement. It's not used because by the time we have what's his name, Julius Caesar going into Britain and stuff, we have accounts of the chariots somewhat being used in battles. They're not used for main battle warfare. They're just used for transport and movement. By the time we get up to the Viking Age, so they are still used because maybe it's just the fact of the size of the chariot that you can put a lot more stuff onto the chariot and then move up and down in and out of the battlefield and stuff. And also, it depends on what the chariots actually look like and what the interpretation of the chariot looks like, because we have little ideas from the Táin Bó Cúailnge of what the chariot looked like, but what the chariot would have looked like during the period of Brian Boru could be easily debatable. Like, are we dealing with like a car or something?
Right. So it basically the word appears in the literature, but there's no like Viking ship equivalent finds of chariots
Yeah.
in graves like there are in yeah.
There's even academics who make arguments that chariot never existed. That it was something that was. I massively disagree with it because it pops up so much in the both the what was it? We have crosses, we have cross slabs and stuff that actually depicts Flanchina with on top of a chariot, and
Right.
we also obviously have the Táin Bó Cúailnge, and it was Dave, the Irish chariot, as he's called. He got the Táin Bó Cúailnge and he built his entire chariot out of the descriptions that's in the Táin, and he was able to prove that basically the person who made the Táin actually had his own chariot himself, because he's giving details and descriptions that only a person that had a chariot would know, and
Right.
Dave
Not
was
not
able to
not
prove
someone
that.
who'd heard about it from some drunkard who traveled
Yeah,
from somewhere else, right? So there's a
yeah.
question. So the Irish did have chariots, Wayne McCullough, which I, yeah, I mean, it sounds like the preponderance of evidence speaks to yes.
Yeah, as far as Brian Boru, it seems that there are chariots used in Ireland, and then drastically after Brian Boru's gone, as we go into the period of the Crusaders, then the chariots just seem to vanish. They disappear after that. Then, of course, um, perhaps it's down to the fact that we're, going into a different age. Maybe there's, more carts and stuff to replace it. It depends on the development of the cart. And as I said earlier, it depends what Brian, people at the time when writing about Brian Brew and stuff, their depiction of what a chariot is. Is a chariot at that point a cart? Is it a car? Do you know?
Right,
It's the
right,
same thing with the word castle. The word castle actually appears in Ireland way at the start of the Viking Age, and it means fort. And then as we go into the late medieval period, and the Renaissance, the word castle is used for everything.
right,
So they'll build a tower house, that's a castle. They'll build a castle, that's a castle. They'll
right.
build a fortified house, that's a castle. So you kind of have to put yourself in, the shoes of the people back then, and their interpretation and view of what is something. Because sometimes when we look at the literature and they say, for example, the word castle, we think, oh, well, they're talking about castle. Maybe not. We kind of have to think of it from their interpretation, which can be quite difficult at times.
Well, I think the word castle is the corruption of castellum, isn't it? The Latin word.
Mm.
So it
I've
makes
looked
it
at-
makes it makes sense that they would have that in the Isles where the Romans definitely were, that they
mm,
just kind of took the word that was uh, sort of what was used for fortifications, and then, like you said, it just became the catch-all for any kind of large structure that could have a
yeah.
vaguely defensive function. Um,
Mm.
yeah, it's that the topic. I can go down a very long tangent on linguistics and the various words for castle in different languages and whether it means pleasure palace or fortress, but we're not
Mm.
going to go there. There's a comment from Ryan O'Malley. By the way, the Pampudi, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, was still worn in the Aran Islands until the 21st century, which is now.
There's people
So,
who allegedly were still wearing it all the way up to 1998 up in the islands and stuff. They're really, really easy to use. Like, I thought people stopped wearing it in the 1960s, and then the other day I was coming across people wearing it all the way up to 1998. Um, so yeah, it's because it's so easy to put on. And obviously you can argue that people are still wearing it today because of living history. So it's just so easy to wrap around your foot, and then you get the leftover leather and you just kind of move it together. And obviously my wife will correct me later on the correct way to put it together and stuff. But yeah, it's exceptionally easy, and that's why you can have it over and over again. However, I would disagree that the Kerns were wearing it. I don't believe the Kerns were wearing it out in the countryside, because I believe that they were going barefoot. And I also don't believe that the Kerns were wearing it going into a settlement, because the Kerns wanted to show off that they were high status. You're still
right,
dealing with somebody who's of the status of the German equivalent of the Landsknecht, that they were high status men. So when they went into a settlement with their Lena and all the other stuff on, they wanted to
right.
show off that they were one of the boys, that they were the men walking in there. And you can't really do that with one of those sort of shoes, in my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't look very flash
Yeah.
relative to the other options that one has in the 15th and 16th century. So there's a
Mhm.
very apt comment here. It sometimes seems that the most common things are those that are the least recorded. Yes.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Uh,
Because
it's
the problem I have with Irish literature, and it's probably the same with European literature as well, is there's a lot of assumption going on. When you're dealing with somebody who's an Irish monk, he doesn't want to show you what you think you would find interesting. He's showing you something that he thinks is absolutely fantastic. For
yeah.
example, God has done this today. Isn't that absolutely amazing? And you're reading this going, like, this is useless to me. And then you want to find out what the locals are getting up to, and he doesn't care. The monk doesn't care. He's like, I'm going to continue writing about God and the miracles
That's
God has
right.
done. Yeah.
Man is temporal and sinful, and God is a miracle worker, and so we
Mhm.
should exalt him. Yeah. It's the same thing with dance manuals, especially from the earlier ones. The 15th century dance manuals clearly don't care about the nitty-gritty of how to step. Like, they
Mhm.
don't care. You should know how to do that. They're only interested in showing you the fancy choreographies that you could get them, hire them to teach you in your court if you so desire, right? So it's
Mhm.
like, can't you just please tell me exactly how you place your foot, sir? No, no, we're not
Mhm.
going to do that. We're going to talk about anything but how you place your foot, which you would think in a dance manual it should be pretty important to tell people how exactly to step, but it isn't. So it's same thing as your
Mhm.
monk who's like,
Yeah.
let's talk about God instead of
Yeah. Yeah.
what the farmers are doing to bring in the harvest today.
And
Yeah,
it's so frustrating because the Irish literature comes before the Saxon literature, and the Saxon literature gives us so much description. And then we look at the Irish literature, and it's like, God did a miracle today. This was God's miracle. And you look for a full year, and it's like you'd see a few changing of kittens and stuff. But that's not what the monks care about. It's always, especially when you look into the life, they're doing the life of the saints and the scholars and people like that, but they're not interested in all the other stuff. Like we can find loads of stuff, especially with Saint Columba, and even the rewriting of Saint Patrick's life and stuff, which, to be fair, gives us a fair idea of what's going on, and then it leaves up to interpretation. For example, like when he's blessing a bucket. Okay, so what could blessing a bucket mean? Is it a miracle from God, or does it mean that they're into cleaning the bucket? That's
right,
the kind of disagreements and arguments that we have, and then it goes into the thing of, well, how clean were the monks? Because if we're assuming blessing of the bucket means cleaning clean the bucket,
right, right. And then
are
they
they
clean
cleaning every day?
themselves, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that this is an assumption, and the word still is we bless the bucket because there was a demon in there, and if we don't clean it, then we'll be what was it called, taken advantage of by the demon, which some academics could argue, well, that could be them getting sick because the bucket isn't clean. This is a
Right.
continuous argument because we're literally just going off a small bit that the monks have written for us.
Yeah, it's I think a lot of people casual practitioners of history don't realize that uh, we don't in the West anyway, we don't have detailed, clean records documenting every single moment of history that tell one
Mm.
objective truth that
Yeah.
is the be all and end all, and that history is constantly evolving because we're constantly discovering new sources and also
Mhm.
reinterpreting old ones.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, so we've got a couple more comments. Any other Irish music from the medieval era? Turlo O'Corlin was 15th century, question mark.
God, music isn't really my specialty now, and I'm going to be in a world of pain in a second when people come in to correct me when it comes
In
down to
in
Irish
in
medieval
in
music.
fairness, it's not a fashion question, Susan. Uh, but
Um,
but yeah. So I will say that I am not familiar with any music from Ireland from the medieval era. It's not, and because of that problem with the sources having not survived, not because there wasn't music. Um,
the only one I can think of now, and it's the actual name of the song is out of my head. It's from that battle that happened up in Wicklow around the Tudor period. That song is in my head right now. The example that's used below in the 15th century, I'm not certain of. I'd have to look up later on.
yeah,
Actually, give us a
Ryan
second.
O'Malley just commented that he was a 17th or 18th century composer
Okay.
or
That's
artist,
why I'm not sure
which
who he
makes
is.
sense.
The only one I can think of right now is from the Tudor period, which is the March of the
Fair.
O'Burns. Yeah, the March of the O'Burns. Their battle tune has survived from the Tudor period. We know that they had bagpipes. They most likely had stuff in from obviously the English and Scottish. Um, God, and there's also a lot of other arguments and stuff. And because there are arguments and stuff as well, I probably just I'm going to play it safe and say it's just not my field of expertise because there is a lot when it comes down to music and what people were using. Yeah, it's a massive, heavy debate right now. So I'll play it safe and just say it's not my field of expertise until I
Okay.
do a little bit more research and
Yeah, well,
fine tune
maybe
the arguments and
so
points.
so for those who don't know, Philip and I are going to be doing a weekly show on his channel where we're going to focus on a particular topic, talk about medieval news, and then focus on a particular topic. So maybe we'll do one on music and dance
Mm.
sometime in the future, and that will give Philip
Yeah,
time to
sounds
brush up
better.
on his Irish on his Irish music knowledge, and me as well, because I basically the last state of my knowledge of medieval Irish music, now hopefully new
Mm.
sources have been found, but was basically that before the 16th century nothing has survived.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a new look at that, but right now that's my current state of the knowledge. But
Mm.
stay tuned
Yeah.
for more information on that. Okay, so we have another comment. I came in on this late. Is what you are wearing, I'm assuming me and not Philip, what a woman would wear in Ireland and Highland Scotland with his plaid
Uh,
fuzzy shirt, Highland
yeah.
Scotland during the 14th century. Okay, what I'm wearing right now is actually very 15th century. This style of coif, this is extremely 15th century, sort of France, Burgundy, England. Um, and this style of gown is called a kirtle and is also very, very, very 15th century. You can tell because of the short sleeves. Now, that being said, what women were probably wearing in Ireland and Highland Scotland during the 14th century would have been sort of like this, but long
Mm.
sleeved, and the neckline would have been higher and would have been rounded. And they would have had three layers. I'm in my house clothes. I'm in my hosting friends in my private chambers clothes. But they would have worn a linen garment similar to this, just slightly higher neckline, a layer like this that laces in the front, and then they would have worn another layer over top of that that probably buttoned in the front. Um, but with a similar silhouette fitted to the curves of the body. The overlayer may be a little more voluminous, possibly lined in fur, probably lined in fur if you're in the Highlands. Um, so yeah, so kind of like this, but rounded neckline, higher neckline, more boat shaped buttons on the overgarment, laces on the undergarment, and then the way women are wearing their hair in Northern Europe at this point, they've got these fun little braids that kind of come in the front, and then they've got these wimples and veils that they arrange around that, and maybe with a pretty circlet. And certainly in Highland, Scotland, and Ireland, they would have wanted to keep their heads covered for warmth.
Yeah, and I
Uh-huh.
think there's laws as well when you go into a settlement that you had to have your hair covered and stuff. But I'd have to look into the laws for settlements in the late medieval period. I think I remember Dave Swift saying during one of his lectures on living history is that there were laws to point out that heads need to be covered during that period. I think is you could easily correct me on this as well. I think there's certain places in Europe as well when you go into a settlement, the head needed to be covered.
Yeah, so it depends on, obviously very localized. These are called sumptuary laws for those who don't know. Sumptus actually means luxury, but it kind of more or less came to be mostly clothing they were regulating. And many of you will be unsurprised to hear that most sumptuary laws regulate women's clothing and not men's clothing. Not all, but the preponderance is aimed at women. And many different places in Europe, different cities, city states, or polities, there are laws about women. Usually not principalities, interestingly. It's usually like the city states that tend to get
Mm,
focused on controlling women more. Um, but they talk about women, if you're married and above a certain rank, you have to cover your hair. Or
mm,
it's even if it's not regulated by law, it's the custom that married women will cover their hair in some fashion so that you
mm.
know she's off the market. So
Oh, yeah.
it, yeah. Do you know if there were laws, if the laws of which you're speaking, do you remember if it was men and women or just women?
Oh, I assume it's men and women because when Dave Swift was saying it in one of his lectures, he was aiming for headdresses for men. And if you look at a lot of depictions as well, is that they always show hats on the men. But I haven't looked at the source now, so don't be quoting from me. I will find the source for that later on and stuff. But yeah, and on top of that as well, I think it was for Dublin. That one is for. So let me look into Dublin and I'll get back to you on that one when it comes down to headdresses and stuff. Because as you said there, it being localized and stuff, would that same law apply in Galway and stuff would be a good question to ask.
Right. So yeah, we maybe that might be, and we could do a whole topic on sumptuary or a whole session on sumptuary laws
Yeah, we could
in
actually.
various places because the things that sometimes try to regulate are hysterical.
Mm.
It's like, we're going to regulate who can wear stripes and who can't. Really?
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
important
yeah.
to you? Okay.
Because
So,
the laws, especially when the statutes of Kilkenny kick in, is it? I assume it's 1366 or around 1360 anyway. Is that we have the penal laws that come in that try to outlaw Gaelic fashion out of Ireland, and it's one of the causes for the Gaelic resurgence that kicks off in 1370 to 1420. Um, Led by Art MacMore Cavanagh, when you have the mixture of the high taxes, which kicks off the peasants' revolt in England, and then in Ireland, you have the Gaelic resurgence between high taxes and the penal laws, the statutes of Kilkenny. But what I'm trying to say there is the statutes of Kilkenny could have massively affected fashion, especially in Dublin, to
mm,
be more Anglo fashion compared to the
right.
fashion that you would have seen in Fitzgerald territory in Kerry, which is very much Gaelic, where you see the linen, the lena with its saffron tunic
Yellow.
and stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
the
you would
saffron
have
yellow
had the
tunic, yeah.
yeah, the bark, the big massive cloaks and stuff. All were supposed to be outlawed in the especially the pale and stuff. So fashion would have been more English from my interpretation. And then when you go to the likes of the Fitzgerald territories, who were still part of the Anglo-Irish world, it would have been more Gaelic influenced. Obviously over from the Highlands of Scotland down to O'Neill territory and into the
Right.
Fitzgerald territory.
Right. Yeah. So it's really interesting because everyone who does an Irish interpretation, they always want their Lena and their brat, and they assume that that's just what everyone was wearing all the time, and men and women. It's like, no,
Mm,
more
if
more
yeah,
complicated than that.
yeah, it really depends who you are. Like, did merchants have laying on? Because it seems to me, from my interpretation of the literature, and obviously, if someone finds anything to correct me on that one, please post it up. But I think it was mostly the nobility and the warrior classes that had the lena on. It seems like the likes of the merchants, the merchants, the farmers and stuff, they would have worn whatever was fashionable at the time from their status. And we've got a lot of laws in Ireland to point out, especially the early medieval period, of what you were allowed to wear. So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think the common farmer would have worn Elena when going out into the field and stuff, especially given the importance of Elena.
and
Because
and
I've
how
seen a lot of
expensive they
things.
were. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like 30 ells of linen goes into making what, because it was linen back then was much narrower, but like 30 ells of linen to make one. And
yeah,
saffron is not cheap and doesn't grow
yeah.
in Ireland, by the way. Um,
Because I've seen depictions of people doing drawings online on Facebook and stuff, and at museums and stuff, and you'd see people in Lena's doing the farming, and I'm like, I don't think they would have done the farming with Elena
it's
on.
it's not a convenient garment to farm
Yeah,
in. I mean, all those the voluminous sleeves and it's
yeah.
just,
Oh, it's
I
proper
know far.
shirt. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a showy garment. I know in under Henry VIII, I remember seeing a sumptuary law regulating what how many lenas an Irishman was allowed to purchase a year. And I think
Mm,
it was one actually. And
yeah.
and I also regulated the amount of linen that was allowed to go into it. It's
Mm,
been a while since I read that, but I remember reading that and thinking, wow, Henry, way to step outside of your lane. This is not
mm. Yeah.
not not your
Complicated.
place. Okay, we've got a good question. Could you do your own thing back in the day with clothes or facial hair, or were you locked into a look?
Locked into a look, in my
Oh, look.
opinion.
Oh God, Ryan O'Malley, he mentions that's really funny. There it is. I didn't even see Ryan's comment. I didn't see your comment, Ryan, but thank you for backing me up with the statute and the date that Henry VIII did that. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, do you think they grew so Ryan says that they grew, he thinks they produced it in Wexford. You could grow saffron crocuses in Wexford, you think?
I do
They
not know.
No, 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 Ryan.
Um,
Sorry, speaking to Ryan O'Malley, I just that the crocuses usually need those the saffron crocuses usually need a very specific environment. But on the other
Wexford is a
hand, the
funny
climate was
place, though.
different back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Um,
maybe I could be wrong, but
Wexford is a funny place, so maybe. Give me a quick second. See if I can
yeah, well,
sneakily.
well, while you look up that, I'm going to address this question. Could you do your own thing in the day with clothes or facial hair, or were you locked into a look? I mean, Depends on where you were. You weren't
Right?
locked into a look. You could choose, you could change the colors you wore from day to day. You could do your facial hair and hair as you like. There there I have not read sumptuary laws that tend to govern that. Um, they do govern sometimes colors in terms of the dye stuff that creates the colors. So, for example, only knights above a certain rank in Edward the Fourth's court were allowed to wear kermes red, but they could wear madder red below a certain rank. So, there are rules that regulate, the kind of clothes you can wear, not say the cut, but the amount of fabric that goes into it, the kind of fabrics that go into it, the kind of dye stuffs that are used, the amount of ornamentation, sometimes even, how long or short things can be. Edward the Fourth regulated, passed a law saying that people under a certain rank couldn't have pikes on their shoes,
Mm.
and pikes are the points, right? Couldn't have pikes on their shoes above 2 inches if they were below a certain rank. So the question of could you, do your own thing within certain parameters? And even then, it's a pay to play situation in a lot of places.
Ireland,
So,
Ireland is very locked in though. We have the early medieval laws straight away, and they literally, depending on everyone gets put into a status, especially from
right,
birth onwards and stuff, and then it literally dictates everything from the food that you're
nice.
allowed to eat all the way to the dyes that you're allowed to use. Because, you, like for instance, if you're at the very bottom of your slave, for example, in Ireland, black and white, that's pretty much the only thing you're allowed to wear, compared to the top, where if you were a Rhea, a king, you could pretty much go every single color. Like at the top, it says that you're to wear blue and purple, but the reason why you're allowed to wear blue and purple is because you can wear all the colors of all the other ranks. So kings would have been very, very colorful, and they were allowed to wear silk. They could do whatever they wanted. So when they came onto the battlefield or wherever they needed to burst into the room of, then you would have seen this big, very colorful, very high status person come into the room.
So
Unlike the
so
slave.
that's it. That's so what year roughly or century maybe are those
So
statutes, and what range of Ireland? Because in Europe these laws are constantly changing and being
mm,
introduced, and there's a constant, depending on where you are, there's a constant shifting, and some Sharia laws especially mostly spring up really late in continental
yeah.
Europe, when you start to have the rise of the merchant class, and so then the nobility start to feel threatened
Yeah,
by
there's
these
definitely
these wealthy
one
people.
whatever it needs to be. I do actually. We have a guide to definitely buy this book if you're getting into all this stuff. A guide to early Irish law by Fergus Kelly, who
Ooh,
discusses the early Irish
nice.
laws in Ireland. And you're exactly right. Depending on your location in Ireland, the laws would have definitely changed, especially because what happens is that you obviously have all the laws that are in place in the early medieval period. Then, when we go into the high medieval period with the coming of the Normans, there's a collapse in the laws in the society, right?
Right.
But then, as we go into the Gaelic resurgence, the Irish then turn away from the English laws and the common laws and stuff, and they start getting back in. They start digging all this stuff back up again, and they start bringing in their own interpretation with a mixture of English law and Roman Catholic law. Sorry, Roman law, and they mix it with the old early medieval Breton law. So this is used as a foundation, and then it's mixed at the late medieval period with the English laws and with the Roman laws. So even more so in the late medieval period, it's very localized. Every area would have had its own interpretation of the
Right.
earlier Breton laws, and they also bring back the old judges. So these had judges that enforced the law, and so even the
Okay.
Fitzgeralds and the Butlers, they're bringing in the judges that had been hiding up in the west of Ireland and the north of Ireland. They're bringing them down to educate the locals on the law. So this gets replaced again with the laws that were happening in Dublin. And then obviously in Dublin, it's from what I recall, it's English laws enforced in Dublin. So the Pale, as it was left,
Right.
which is the area around Dublin, was under English law, and then the likes of the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds were having a mixture of English law mixed with the Brehon law. And then obviously, if you went up to the likes of the O'Donnells and the O'Neills and the O'Connors up in the northwest of the country, you're dealing with more stricter Gaelic laws rather than English laws or the Roman canon laws.
Right. Yeah. So it's whenever someone asks me a question like that, I always have to say the caveat, the Middle Ages is not a monolith.
Yeah.
Your mileage will absolutely vary based on where you specifically want. So,
Mm.
with a question like that, you have to, uh, did they wear this or did this happen? I need a year and I need a place, and then I can
Mm.
more accurately inform based
Yeah.
on that specific place. And
Because
go on.
that's a fact, because it's not even like the Fitzgeralds, for example, completely brought in Brehon law straight away. It's not like the judge came in and then suddenly all the laws were Gaelic. This is a slow, gradual development, and you can see
Right.
that by the laws that they bring in. For example, it's not until about 1420, although the Brehon judges had come back around 1370, if I think so, with what was it, Garrod, the Port Fitzgerald. It's not until about 1420 that we have coin and levy laws that had to come in. And coin and levy laws actually were just laws that were kind of Gaelic laws that were adapted
Mm,
to modern warfare. And they were to do with mercenary companies, like, as you would see in the continent, with Lance Connects, Gallo Glasses in Ireland. And so these, like, the thing is that they couldn't just bring the laws in. The world had been like modernized to the late
right.
medieval period. So they had to completely adapt all these ancient laws to a more modern audience. And this took time to development. And also you had a world that was developing around them. So they're constantly adapting what they did have around them. Um,
And it's
so
always a
as you
question
said,
of what the purpose of the law, why laws have a purpose. What is the purpose? So with sumptuary laws outside of Ireland anyway, the purpose was always, well, we need to distinguish ourselves, we the nobility,
mm,
the well-heeled members of society. We need to distinguish ourselves from these upstart merchants who are
mm,
trying to put themselves to be equal with us. So is that sort of what's happening in like the 14th,
big
15th
time.
century in Ireland? Is that
Yeah,
what's
yeah, big time.
driving that?
Big time, big time, big time. Because you can see that straight away with the early Irish laws and the different colours. So if you were at the bottom, you could use less colours, and then at the top, obviously, the likes of Fitzgerald's and stuff are going to be as colourful as possible, and then it fits in with the styles at the time. Obviously, I know much more about early Irish law than I do with the late medieval laws. But for my interpretation, it's still the same thing of, you know, these status people were allowed to wear these clothing, and then the higher nobility had to wear this sort of clothing and stuff. So that's my interpretation. So yeah, though it was definitely locked in place depending on where you were born and what your status is within that society.
Right. So the good question, did people actually follow sumptuary laws? Well, no, they did not. In pretty much any place where I've studied sumptuary laws in Europe, they did not. It was a pay-to-play situation.
Mm,
For the most part, in many places, it was, a good way for a city to get extra revenue from from the merchant class mostly.
mm.
There were some cases in Florence where they actually had literal fashion police who would actually go out and try to enforce it on women, and these Florentine women weren't having any of it. Like they would they would actually try to like take the offending garment from them if it was an overgarment, and it didn't go well for the fashion police generally. They weren't equipped to deal with these ladies. So, in Ireland, have you read any evidence of people just sort of paying a fine so they can keep wearing whatever they want?
So that's quite complicated. I haven't come across any fines that I know of. There most likely probably was fines, to be honest with you, because it doesn't seem to be the great free for all at times that it is, but then at other times it kind of is at the same time. So early medieval law, obviously at the very start of the Golden Age, the laws seem to be like in place, but then obviously you have to come into the Vikings. And especially early on, the Vikings just do whatever they want. But then when
Right,
Dublin is established, you have Irish Vikings who are like, well, this is the law. And the thing is, they're somewhat enforced because the Eemers, the Irish Vikings, they don't want to be fighting two wars. They're already at war with England. They don't want to be at war with the Over King of Ireland, because the difference is that the Over King of Ireland can knock at their door and say, bang, bang, bang,
right,
do what you're told, or I'm going to siege Dublin and take it from you. So the Eemers will play the political game. The Eemers are kind of always broken into two kind of groups. The one that's in England fighting everyone, and then the one that's in Ireland playing the game.
right,
And the reason why they're playing the game is because, they need to be a part of Irish society. And so they're always part of the political game that's going on. Where in England, it's just a free for all. They're just doing whatever they want. They're meant to be
right.
like, what's hilarious is they're meant to be Catholic, and they're doing complete pagan stuff. the older Vikings, the Danish Vikings, end up inviting Norway to invade them around, I think it's 950. They invite Norway to invade them because they don't like the Irish Vikings so much. It's havoc in the north of England, compared to Ireland, on the other hand, where the Eam are completely different people. There they are Catholic. In fact, they protect the churches in Ireland. The churches pay a protection fee to them. They protect the churches. So it's a completely different face in Ireland. They're the typical. My mother had it. Was it a street devil and a house angel, and that was pretty much the Irish Vikings. So there, when the Vikings do, the Eamers, the Irish Vikings do take control, then those laws are enforced to a certain degree. But I say to a certain degree because obviously, once again, there's characters such as the Irish mercenaries that break, those laws go out the window. They're supposed to be dressed in a certain way, and yet they're rocking up to battle. For example, the Battle of Tara, when they're actually fighting the High King himself, the Irish Vikings rock up, and every single one of them is covered in silk. If you actually look up the Battle of Tara, that's what is shocking to Mel Shocknell in these force, is that you had these Vikings rocking up, and every single one of them are rocking up in their very beautiful, very colorful silk to fight them, which blows their minds. I think I remember saying this to you. I can't remember if it was yourself, Rachel, or someone else. Of the fact that silk was insanely expensive
It was
to rock
me.
up the
It was
battles.
in yeah, it was crazy expensive. It was woven in like 20-inch widths, and
Mm,
it was imported from either the Far East, or at that point you had some production centers in Byzantium. But
yeah.
it was not produced in mainland Europe, so it was an
Yes.
import. So yeah, to wear that into battle with all
Yeah.
your oiled mail, just sort of making it all greasy and nasty
Yes.
anyway, and then bleeding on it. I mean,
Mm.
that's a baller move.
Yes, and we do know that they were wearing riveted mail over that. So you had the I think
Ah.
it's the riveted mail over it. Yes, 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 yes. You can imagine that. That's why it
Oh,
was blowing their mind, like.
it makes me cry. For those who don't know, riveted mail, any mail needs to be oiled if it's before the modern world, because there's no stainless steel. And so
Mm,
you had to oil it. It was constant. All armor was covered, all metal bits were covered in oil at all times so that they didn't rust, which means that a male shirt is just one big hunk of oil. And
yeah.
when you put it on a garment, the garment immediately gets an oil mail print all
Mm,
over it. So they're wearing these beautiful silk tunics, and then they put on their mail hauberks. That's great.
yes. And that's before they get chopped up as well, because they lose the battle.
Of course. Well, if you're going to get chopped up, at least your corpse parts will be pretty and bright. I don't know.
Yes.
Um, Okay, so we have a couple of really kitty. Sorry if you all heard that. That's my cat doing something he shouldn't. A couple of comments. Ryan O'Malley says, makes an astute observation. Those sumptuary laws remind me of the Japanese law on how only samurai could wear both the uchigatana and the wakizashi through the obi sash. Yes, and God knows, the Japanese. I haven't done any kind of deep study of Japanese sumptuary laws, but I'm going to bet that in the Heian period and in the Warring Kingdoms period, or the Warring Lords period, I will bet there was sumptuary laws out the wazoo.
Yeah, I can
And then
imagine as
and then
well.
especially
My wife was out the
especially,
window. So.
yeah, I mean, God, if you want to talk about a culture that wants to regulate things, um, all the Asian kingdoms were really big on sumptuary regulations, because China kind of set the standard that
Mm,
each rank is only allowed to wear this kind of thing and this
yeah.
kind of rank badge and these colors and this kind of hat. And God knows, Joseon, the Koryo dynasty and Joseon ran off with that. The
Mm,
Japanese court had similar strictures. So yeah, but here that was enforced. In Asia, it was enforced. There was no pay to play. You got
mm,
beaten, like literal noble. No, I know in Joseon in Korea there were noble people who are actually flogged, not flogged, spanked, paddled.
mm.
Um, their bare bottoms paddled because they wore a cheeky wrong thing.
Oh,
So no pay to play in Asia, just pain to play in Asia.
yeah, it's still like that today, I reckon.
Let's see, comment. It's hard to make a more massive statement of power than that, and likely the most stunning way too. Oh, I think it's a delayed response to paying to play, not painting to play.
Mm, mm, mm.
um, yeah, and then Ryan O'Malley comments that there are, several periods in Japanese history that are underrated. Yeah, yeah, Edo gets
Yeah,
all the attention, just like Joseon. It's the same in Korea. The Joseon era gets all the attention. The Shilla dynasty is really the impressive one and should get all the attention. And
yeah,
Goryeo is kind of the what I call Korea's Mongol period, and no one gives that any attention. So I agree.
yeah.
I think modern historians are looking at the wrong parts of Asian history.
Mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm.
And that little also the fashions are way more interesting in Sheila than they are in the Joseon dynasty, just
Uh,
saying. And actually Heian fashions, I don't know how familiar you are with historical Japanese fashions, Philip.
it's whatever. My wife is very, very, very good because my wife is actually from
I
Japan. Like she's very, very educated with all that stuff. But
I
she's just jumped out the window. She's listened to too much of the historical war crimes I was committing
oh
there.
yeah.
My
Yeah,
waffle, and she's gone out the window.
I will say the Heian period is my favorite period of Japanese fashion history because it's all these gorgeous, elegant draped layers. We're wearing like 12, 13 layers, each one carefully graduated with these full sleeves and different colors. It just, so stunning. Granted, all you do is move placidly about. You don't do very much in these clothes, but
Mm, mm, mm.
yeah. Question: was the song Philip was thinking about Fiek Mikua Björn?
It is. It does mention that. What's the correct name? Give us a quick second, and I will actually quickly look that up. Because I remember I did
Oh, is that the
a little
marching
short.
the 16th century marching tune you were talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I had a short
Ah,
one back. Give us a
for
second.
those who are just joining us, please hit that thumbs up if you're enjoying this, or the thumbs down if you're not. Just hit a thumb. Please hit a thumb. Um, and two, this question about the song we talked a little bit earlier about music in Ireland, and Philip mentioned that he was familiar with one extant marching tune from the
Mm,
Tudor era, from the 16th century. And so Ryan has asked if that was the song of which Philip was thinking, and survey
yes, it
says
is.
he
Give
thinks
us a
it
quick,
is.
quick, quick second. I'm
So
quickly
you think
flying around
that's
the
okay.
short.
I can hold forth. I can hold forth. Yeah,
Uh,
so technically this was about medieval fashion, but we have occasionally strayed into fashion adjacent topics.
Follow Me Up to Carlo. That's the name of the tune. Follow Me Up to Carlo.
Carol, does it have a date for it in that source that you have?
Give us another quick second. I'll
Okay,
just
another
quickly.
quick second.
I have the name
Um,
now, so it won't be too bad. Follow Me Up to Carlo.
and if you're enjoying this interplay between Philip and myself, we will be doing a weekly session on his channel, Irish Medieval History, where we will focus on one topic. We'll talk about some news and then delve into that medieval history news, and then we will delve into that topic. So that'll be every Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Asia, Korea/Japan time, and whatever time that is in your respective time zone.
Mm. That's 1580, the Battle of Glenmore. And he's completely right. That is the same noble that took part. He was leading the charge. So that's his battle march that he
Nice.
used. Well, he ambushed the what was it? The English. It was a classic English versus Irish battle during the Tudor conquest of Ireland. And the O'Byrnes and the O'Tooles were able to successfully ambush the English and beat them. I think they had a few English troops on the O'Byrne side as well, if I recall when I was researching this. Obviously, it doesn't say that on the Wikipedia site, but yeah, it was a part of the Desmond Rebellion. A lot of it was very religiously fueled as well. So I think there's a few English Catholics that were on the side of the Irish in that battle as well. Because at the
That
time,
would
as you
not
know,
that would not surprise me.
uh,
Elizabeth had made plenty of Catholic enemies, so
mm,
so yeah, maybe when we do a topic on music and dance, we will be talking about things like this tune, because maybe even playing some excerpts of the music we can find that is relevant, because Irish
mm,
music, not much has survived. So anything that has survived from before the 18th century is exciting to me.
mm.
Okay, so everyone, we've been holding forth for 2 hours. So I am going to give a chance for one last round of questions about medieval fashion. Can be any part of Europe, and apparently we've expanded into Asia. Um,
Yeah, we did, didn't we?
um, and any kind of time period within that medieval history period. Um,
Mm.
well, while I give you a chance to ask your questions, I'm just going to give you a quick presentation, visual presentation on the layers of men's clothing in the 15th century. So this is these are the basic layers that everyone was wearing pretty much everywhere in Europe in this time. The specific details may have varied, but the basic layers are the same. So we have here our linen shirt. I'm going to push my camera back so there's some more room. We have, get more, sorry if I made you all queasy. Okay, yeah, so we have our linen shirt. And this one has a high collar. And if you actually look in the portraits from this era on men, you'll see this linen peeking up above their doublets. And that's this collar. And this collar protects the doublet from your nasty, nasty skin.
Mm.
So you've got your linen undershirt. And then you've got the layer that goes over top of this. And this layer was never seen unless you were engaged in martial arts. Let me make
Why?
this clear. A lot of reenactors wander around in just this layer, and they're basically wearing their underclothes. Okay, so we have this is a farsetto. A farsetto in Italian, a pourpoint in French, a doublet in English, a vams in German, right? So you have this fitted garment, right? And your hosen lace right into it. And hosen started off as being two separate legs, but by the end of the 15th century, they've been joined. And, you have a modesty triangle there, and it all laces together. By the way, wearing clothes like this means gentlemen have to have a certain circadian rhythm uh, about their daily ablutions, because otherwise you can't just easily pull this off when you need to use the privy, right? So this is a layer that is then covered by an overlayer that could look like a lot of things, but this is one example of the overlayer. So this is a 15th century Italian Florentine men's giornea, it's called. It's open on the sides. A lot of people mistakenly call this a tabard. It's not a tabard. A tabard is a very specific heraldic thing that has nothing to do with fashion, has to do with function. And this one doesn't have pleats built into it. You belt it and then it gets pleats, or you don't belt it, either or. But you have to wear something like this over your doublet and hosen, gentlemen. Otherwise, you're some young hooligan who's up to no good.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, okay. So, question, comment. Thanks for this and love to the cats. Philip, did your wife catch the newest Shogun series?
Not yet. We need to get a hold of Disney first to go and watch that. But yeah, we're quite excited to watch it when we do see it. The trailers and stuff seemed quite interesting. However, when it comes down to fashion and stuff, my wife had seen the new Assassin's Creed video game set in Japan, and ooh, she has a lot of corrections to do there. So my wife, when it comes down to Japanese fashion of the medieval period, is very, very nitpicky. Very nitpicky. Like she's very passionate about European medieval fashion. But when it comes to Japanese medieval fashion, ooh boy, she's next level nitpicky there. Like,
Well, and it's why I can't watch so many of these costume dramas because of the clothing. Like I can't. My mom keeps begging me to watch The King, and I'm like, I can't. I can't
yeah,
do it. I can't do it. I'm sorry, because clothing is goes hand in hand with the history. It
yeah,
influenced how
especially that
people
one. Yeah,
behaved. It demonstrated their rank. I can't watch this guy walking around in leather pants. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Okay, so then next question. What time did the Scottish Highlanders and Gaelic Irish share fashion culture, and would they have both worn lenas at some point?
The laners in the Highland is very, very debatable. I don't think the Lena would have been in it. It's such a funny one. Do you know what? I actually want to go and ask a American Scottish historian a few questions. I might add that into his questions with the when it comes down to the MacDonalds and the MacLeods. Did the MacDonalds and the MacLeods wear Lenas? So I'll bring that question to him. When it comes down to sharing fashion, that would have been there since the early medieval period. Obviously, you had Gaelic culture that was making its way into the Highlands with the kind of, it's debated if it was a Gaelic invasion of the Gaelic had already been there earlier and stuff. So obviously at the start of the early medieval period, you had that influence going between the two. And then as we go into the Scottish War of Independence around 1290, the O'Neills started to open up communication with the Stuarts. And that's where you had lowland fashion making its way from Edinburgh all the way over to O'Neill territory, and then obviously blurring from there. And obviously, as well, if we look at what was it, late medieval literature and stuff, Rachel can correct me on this one. We have books where we literally have Gaelic bards from the O'Neill territory in Edinburgh singing to the Scottish Stuart king. So it is. I wouldn't say it's a blur, but between the Highlands, which is the Gaelic area, and the Lowlands, there is a proper blur there. But obviously, there are people. I'll try to invite them over to Irish medieval history to go into further details of that blur between the Highlands and the Lowlands, because it's way out of my field of expertise. And I'd love to personally, I'd love to bring somebody on to actually have a deeper conversation when it comes down to the blur between the Highlands and the Lowlands and that Scottish fashion, because that's a really interesting topic that everyone loves, is the conversation of what's the similarities and the differences between the Highlands and the Lowlands. And then even more interesting, how does that blur into the Gaelic territories in Ireland? And then even more interesting, how that blurs then into the Anglo-Irish societies down in the southeast of the country.
Right. So the short answer is information is outstanding. We still we need more input. I mean, the problem with the Highland in general, doing any research on the Highlands, is that there just aren't as many sources.
Yeah.
I am not familiar with any extant garments that have been found in the Highlands of Scotland from this era. It's not like Ireland, right? I say that, I phrase it that way specifically. I am not familiar with. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I know of a single piece of tartan that was discovered about 30 years ago, and they finally actually got to examine it, and it dates to the 1520s. And it's like a piece this big, so that doesn't tell us anything about the clothing. It's just they had tartan in 1520, and it was a square. So who knows what it once was. How connected. I think the question that most people, and forgive me if I'm overinterpreting your question, Ryan, it's an excellent question, is it was Ryan who asked that question, right? Yes, Ryan. Often when I get that question about Scottish fashion, people are they're desperately wanting some kind of, romanticized, Braveheart-esque style of Celtic clothing that is somehow completely distinct from what everyone else in Northern Europe was wearing. And I'm not saying you're doing that, Ryan. Just generally, when I get that question, that's what people are hoping for. And my answer is sadly that the evidence does not point to that.
Yeah, it's mostly what dominates is French. And when you're talking about the Scottish War of Independence in both Ireland and Scotland, what is dominating fashion-wise is French, especially in the Lowlands. Lowlands is 100% French clothing. And then you've got Scandinavian fashion and clothing coming in from the Highlands down into Ireland and stuff, which is slightly broken with the Scottish Norwegian War, but that's still the fashion that somewhat dominates both Ireland and Scotland in the Scottish War of Independence. It's not blue woad and tartan and kilts that dominate the fashion, sadly.
And the question about the Lena is an interesting one. I have not personally seen evidence of a Lena in the Highlands.
It's the MacDonalds and the MacLeods, because they go between the two worlds so often. So if you don't know, the MacDonalds and the MacLeods were head of the Gaelic mercenaries between Scotland and Ireland. And so if anyone's going to be wearing a Lena, it would be the MacDonalds and MacLeods. So I'll have to do a wee bit of investigation and ask a few questions around to see if the MacDonalds and MacLeods were wearing Lena and when were they wearing the Lena.
Right.
We know that by the 12th century, according to Gerald of Wales and his depictions, we have one of Diarmid MacMahon the Moor wearing a Lena. So we know there's definitely Lenas by the 12th century. And then obviously there's arguments and debates on what Lena
Well, wait,
is
wait,
from
wait,
obviously
wait. So
very medieval Europe.
Gerald, see, the problem with Gerald of Wales is that while he's writing in the 12th century or the
Mm.
11th or 12th century, his manuscripts get copied and then they get illuminated in more up-to-date fashions. So I would question the date of that illumination
Yeah,
and
yeah,
whether that represents 12th, 11th, 12th century or the date, because I know
yeah.
a lot of his stuff is like, recopied and redone in the 14th and even 15th century, because
Mhm.
then Caxton gets a hold of it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. But
William Caxton gets a hold of Gerald of Wales.
the person then to try, we will try to, or we'll literally try our best to see if we can actually grab him and pull him on, is
Yeah.
Dr. Diarmuid Scully, who's actually on History Hit right now. So if it was maybe last year, maybe it would be easier to grab a hold of him. This year, working on History Hit, maybe not so easy to grab him, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll send him an email being, I was your past student. I was your best student. I love you.
I was your
We'll see
best
what we can do.
student.
We'll
But
see. We'll see what we can do.
on that topic, actually, one of our upcoming episodes on Irish medieval history on our new weekly show is going to actually be, we talked about doing specifically focusing on medieval
Mm.
Scottish clothing. So
Yeah.
we'll try to get up to snuff for that.
Yeah,
But
that will be for the 18th. So we'll see what
yeah,
we can do from then. The Lena, I'll try to investigate. I'm not. I don't know if I'll be able to find a conclusion on that one or not, but we'll try our best anyway for the 18th. And I think it's on the 11th. We're doing food as well, aren't we?
yeah. Next week we're going to be talking about medieval food. So
Yeah,
join
yeah,
in for that. It's going to be an appetite driving episode. And
yeah.
if I'm feeling really industrious, I'll maybe make some dishes to actually show you as I eat them in front of you.
Yeah, tease me, definitely.
Okay, so let's see. Um, Comment from Ryan O'Malley, back to Shogun. Interesting in Shogun that cross-legged sitting is depicted. When sitting, seiza was more common today.
Yeah. You'll have to ask my wife about that. I think
Yeah,
those little details will probably drive her wild now. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll sneakily put it on for her and see what she thinks. But it'll
So
probably be just my wife moaning the whole time.
so Ryan also then says, I'm wondering if the Scots would have looked the same as the Gaelic Irish at some point in medieval history.
Yeah, big time. The Highlanders, not the Lowlanders. Lowlanders are always following the fashion of France and what the main fashion is going on there. But the Highlanders, according to Sean Duffy, going into the Scottish War of Independence, he says there's not much of a difference. If you were to hop onto a boat in O'Neill territory, the Gaelic side, and then jump over to the Highlands, you wouldn't have noticed too much of a difference. Now that's debatable, and I'm sure there's a Scottish historian in the comment section will be like, "Fucking no, 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 no." So obviously, if you are going to argue against me and stuff, please use references because I'd love to see these references. If Sean Duffy is wrong, definitely go down to the comment section and comment below. And give us your interpretation. I always want
Absolutely.
to know what people's interpretations are. But don't resort to just saying you're wrong and then just go into name calling. I had that with the Anglo-Irish debate, and I was like, well, that just
Oh,
ruined a good debate.
yeah, just exactly. If I'm always happy for people to disagree politely, respectfully, and with sources.
Yeah.
uh, because our understanding of history is constantly evolving. And so I'm always happy for new information. I am not happy for aspersions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, one final comment from Ryan O'Malley. There is a good clue actually. There is a 1544 battle in Scotland called the Battle of the Shirts. Maybe a
Mm.
good place to start.
Yes, that would be actually a good spot.
That would be a good place to start.
15.
Okay, well then everyone, I thank you all so much. And I really, Philip, thank you so much for coming over
Oh,
to
you're
my
welcome.
space. I know a lot of my people are really excited to have this taste of Ireland from an
Yes.
actual Irishman.
Yeah.
and just again, Philip and I are going to be doing a lot of collaboration going forward. So I hope you go jump over to his channel and subscribe. And I hope to see many of you in our future sessions together. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend wherever you are in the world. Bye.
Slán Bye.